the impact of AI. This particular industry, 90% of it can be eliminated completely with AI.
And this is exactly where I get concerned. If the only jobs that remain are these high-level ones, how do we upskill people to that level?
Carol Kulik, a Bradley Distinguished Research Professor with the Centre for Workplace Excellence at the University of South Australia. She's the co-author of Human Resources for the Non-HR Manager and a leading expert on workplace inclusion.
And I'll tell you two statistics that scare me. These are the things that keep me up at night. The Wall Street Journal reported an analysis that was done of the U.S. labor market over a 3-year period. And what they found was that among people who were promoted into their first managerial role, 29% left in the first month. In Australia, 60% of new entrants say they never want to be a manager.
Professor Carol, welcome to the Martian podcast. Thank you for taking the time to travel from Uni of SA, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Is it in Adelaide or is it
It
outside
is,
of
right in
Adelaide?
Adelaide.
Cool. How's the weather in Adelaide? All right?
Oh, it's been good. It's been very nice.
Okay. So we started talking just before this and we got interrupted with the awesome director, producer. What else we call you here? The person that runs the show from a technical point of view. We were talking about the disruption of AI potentially. You took an example of in a law firm. And just wanted to add to what you were saying, that the depth of disruption is going to be so great. You were concerned about the passing on of the knowledge and experiences from a senior lawyer to a junior lawyer who's starting out. There used to be in the past, before this whole working from home and things be done online and stuff, more collaboration and more interaction, whereby there would be more opportunities for that passing on of that knowledge from a senior lawyer to. But I'm talking about now this particular industry, 90% of it can be eliminated completely with AI.
90% of the HR industry?
Of
Is
the
that what you mean?
lawyers.
Oh, of the lawyers.
Yeah. Sorry, you were talking about the law
Yes, I
firms, in
was.
law firms, as an example, the impact of AI, how you were concerned about the passing on of the knowledge because of the online and stuff. And potentially the some of that prep work and research work perhaps that the junior lawyers are doing at the moment or have been doing, they can be replaced by AI agents. I'm talking about this particular industry can be disrupted by up to 90% job losses.
And this is exactly where I get concerned. If the only jobs that remain are these high-level ones that are about using the information that the AI tool is going to present to you and being able to be discerning about it and leverage it, how do we upskill people to that level without all the steps in between?
I'm not really sure. I think there's no upskilling anymore. I think maybe the only compliance that would be left here is the government. For the government to say, oh, look, you've got to have that particular degree or this particular training before you can practice. That will be the only thing that's going to leave the so-called lawyer. But they will still, that's going to disrupt the industry, because you know how you said something to me yesterday, for example, and this is one of the points we want to talk about in the HR world, that whole thing about the manager being more involved doing HR work, as opposed to it used to be big separation between the HR folks and the managers, and now more and more. Yeah, I mean, we built features in a platform now we call them manager self-service. The idea is the manager can go in and do things straight away themselves instead of being sitting in this queue creating bottleneck on the HR. I mean, that is, to be honest, probably 90% of the premise of our platform. Yeah. So when you think about it from that point of view, any lawyer, any junior lawyer, any person that aspires to be a lawyer with AI can actually can do so much work, except does the government say, are you qualified to do that work? That will be the only thing. So what will end up happening, those AI softwares and agents will be passed on to the managers themselves. So less and less those managers, where the work is originated from, where they need the legal work to help me with a contract, blah, 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 they will be doing it directly. The managers will be cutting out the industry completely.
So I'm just trying to think of a specific example.
Sure. Do you want to give you one?
Sure. Yeah.
Stuff that we work on all the time here. Two major areas: the employment law, employment lawyers, employment contracts. I'm sorry, especially when you've got commercial sales folks, etc. Got the commission structure and all that stuff that needs to be signed off as well. And the second area is when we sign up large clients, typically the terms of use and the privacy, they negotiate that. They get their legals involved. They don't like to work from what we have on the website. They think this is not good enough and you could be changing this. We can't sign on something that's so dynamic. We need it as a PDF with the contract. We want to know what your terms are. We want to be comfortable with. And the two issues are the indemnity and the limitation of liability. These are the two issues that all the time we're negotiating with all large clients. So we do that about 15 times a year, really large deals, yeah, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the employment law and the terminations as well. So let's work. You can work with any of these, please.
So I'm just thinking about what the individual managers are doing. It seems to me that one of the things you're suggesting is that these are routine enough events that they can be automated.
I don't know about
Yeah.
that, Dr.
And
Professor Carol.
well, I think that's the question, right?
Okay,
Is
okay.
to what extent are we leaving individuals enough room to think outside of that box and design a very different kind of contractual relationship, or to generate terms that the bots have never seen before? You know, I think that that's where some of the interesting things happen.
I think this is changing so quickly, Professor Carol.
It's dramatic. I think it's really dramatic.
I-
You know, I most of the work that I do is on, I think, a smaller scale where I'm not thinking so much about losing an entire industry, but how it changes the relationship between a manager and an employee. So I'm really interested in the fact that, and I know you're interested in performance management because that's one of the places that Martian logic is going. What we're seeing in the research is that managers are increasingly using AI to write their performance reviews. Employees are increasingly using AI in order to write their self-reviews in preparation for performance
I didn't
management.
even know that.
But both of those parties don't like when the other party is using AI in the relationship.
Got it.
So I think that's a really important challenge.
That's
and that's where
interesting.
my research starts to kind of bump into some of the goals of the HR industry,
yeah.
right? There's a lot of benefit in terms of efficiency and reproducibility in using AI because we're able to use it to find the patterns, to find the most common cases, to free up the individuals to do parts of the work that can't be automated or that can't be done by AI. And yet, just the act of using it is affecting our relationship.
I see this interesting dynamic there. Can I respectfully take us back to that point about the potential disruption of AI in the HR? And I'm so glad. It really was like magic how you used the example of the law firm. Now I'm thinking about it in the last minute and going, it's such an interesting example because, you know, why we're here and stuff, because I'm myself as a manager, as a CEO, I'm interested in all these topics. So I'm going to take myself as a real example here. So no theory, zero theory. This is 100% practice. Okay, let's learn from it. I need HR work when I'm, let's say, as I said, signing an employment contract. When I'm want to terminate someone, I want to make sure it's compliant, it's legal, we've done everything we can. Or is it if it's within, let's say, the probation period, maybe there's less pressure on us to be able to do that, less work that we have to prove, less compliance in a sense. But I check all of that with my lawyer. It's about the knowledge, it's about the confidence. I can do all that right now with AI. I might need to maybe call my lawyer and just validate a couple of points because I've got the knowledge in front of me. I know what I need to do. And I'm saying, listen, this person has been with us for blah, blah, blah. I want to let them go. I'm concerned about a blah, but I think it's good blah. What do you reckon? Yep, I think it's all good. No, you're right. So now it's gone from 2, 3, 4 hours to about maybe 5 minutes or to nothing. But it's interesting. So that HR and legal, clearly, I mean, employment law, it's law, right? So compliance, so HR and legal, correct me on that, for someone like me, that's all compliance. That's all, it's all about part of it, I'm sorry, about being compliant, being not to get in trouble with the law in a sense, or with the governments, etc. And I'm telling you, 95% of all those consultations will be eliminated by consulting an AI agent.
That was a beautiful example, Anwar, because it kind of helps me to understand how you and I view HR.
Sure.
I think your starting point was that HR is about compliance. HR is about...
That was rude. That was not right. That's only one part of it. Compliance is only one part of it.
And in fact, I would argue it's...
So I apologize.
I would argue it's the least important part.
Here you go.
And I agree with you completely that it is an important part. We want to make sure that we are in compliance. I mean, the laws are there for a reason. They're about protecting employees' rights. But I think if we think about HR as really being more about getting the most out of employees, helping employees to develop their full potential, where I see the magic of AI is getting rid of some of that clutter and administration that takes up so much of our time and effort, so that now we really can focus on the relationship part. What really scares me is that we don't want to damage the relationship along the way. And that's why I gave you the example of performance management. As long as we understand how we're using AI in our relationship, that's great. Or, when you give the example of, I've made sure that the contract is correct. But now when I discuss the contract with my client, or when I discuss the termination with my employee, that's really personal. That's about the relationship. And, just because you use the example of termination, we know from a body of research that when a termination is happening, when a layoff is happening, so a non-voluntary exit, what the manager says at that moment of exit is twice as important as any other factor you can think of in influencing how that person leaves as they exit the organization. So in my literature, there's something called the vendetta effect, where an employee who's laid off is so angry about the layoff that they'll engage in sabotage or bad-mouthing them on social media. And so I just want to make the point that individual interaction is super important. We don't want to lose it.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to say I feel I'm in the presence of a giant. You've schooled me. Guys, that is so correct. I want to deeply apologize if I said HR is compliant. I think the law firm example made me think in that direction, but thank you so much for beautifully clarifying it like that. So, and please continue. So what you're saying is it could be a good thing that AI can take all the admin rubbish out so HR can do real HR work. It's those relationships. These are, oh my God, you are amazing. Yeah, please keep going.
So what a great opportunity for us to talk about your clients and the people listening to this podcast who are mainly HR professionals. So their role has changed so dramatically over the last 10 years, 20 years. If we were to go back and look at the HR profession, it was all about administration. It was all about compliance. It was all about the paperwork. And now the HR professionals are thinking really big strategic things. It's succession planning. It's workforce planning. It's employee value propositions, right? So these are the big strategic efforts they want their CEOs to be building into the business strategy, to be thinking about people from day one. And I think one of the beautiful things about products like yours is they give the HR professional space and room to do those things, right? Okay, now they can focus on the big issues. Now they can sit down in the C-suite and, really try and build people strategy along the way. But what's interesting about that is because HR professionals are thinking about strategic things, they have this very long-range future orientation, and they're thinking about employees as a group. And what that means is the day-to-day interactions with employees that have to be customized and have to happen right now are being enacted by line managers. So there's research.
Because I'm sorry, I get the problem you're referring to. I can't see. I didn't understand how is that emerging or maybe being, more and more being highlighted. You're saying because, please correct me, because HR are working on strategic stuff, they are having less time. Sorry, can you repeat that? The
So-
problem you're highlighting?
So one of the things that we've seen is that the HR profession has gotten more strategic.
Yeah.
And along the way, they have given away more of the operational, day-to-day
To the
nuts and
managers?
bolts to line managers.
Okay.
And for the most part, that's a great thing, actually.
Okay.
We know that individual employees, on average, have 2 HR events in every work week. And an HR event is anything related to their career development, to the design of their work, these sort of people management things. But they're not having those conversations with the HR unit. They're having them with their individual line managers.
Okay.
Right? So those activities are much more concentrated in the dyad, and the HR unit is more about things that will uniformly affect employees. So enterprise bargaining, for example. These are things that are going to affect every employee in pretty much the same way. It's the individual manager who does the customization.
Mm-hmm.
So let me tell you about a change that I've seen in my own work.
Okay.
So in so much of the work that we do, we are really interested in comparing employer perceptions of practices with employee experiences with those practices. So we would go out and we would ask senior HR professionals, tell us about your HR practices. Do you have mentoring? Do you have flexible work? Do you have leadership development? And the HR managers would give us the answers, say we have this, we have that, we have these other things. Then we'd go to employees and employees would say, what are you talking about? I don't get any mentoring. I've never been invited to any of these career development. So we would see a gap.
Sure.
And most of the time that gap was attributed to line managers because the HR professionals would design these great policies and initiatives, but line managers have to be the ones to motivate their employees and encourage them to take it up. And, line managers have their own KPIs, so they're trying to keep people doing the work. Now, things are changing. One of the things we see now is that employees say, I'm getting all this great mentoring. Oh, my work group has this great flexibility program. And we go and talk to HR professionals and they say, we don't have a program like that. I've never heard about that practice. That's not on the books. And what that reflects is that line managers are picking up more and more of these responsibilities. They're much more likely to launch their own people management practices on the ground. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm an academic, so it's always a little of this, a little bit of that.
Okay.
It's been really good for the HR profession. We know that the HR profession is viewed more positively today than it was even 10 years ago.
And why is that?
It's because
How
it's
is it
seen
linked to that point?
because
Is it, or-
it's seen as a more strategic profession.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it has more status. It has more prestige.
Sure.
It's seen as affecting the big issues in company
Sure.
survival. That's great. I also think that this movement has been really good for employees because as an individual employee, it is your line manager who can create the customization and deal with your needs.
Yeah.
But the question that I ask is, has it been good for line managers? We're making their jobs harder and harder every day.
Even though if there are systems like ours that can remind them there's a performance review coming up, and by the way, here's the template, you just need to click, and it's on its way, etc. Even with all the, because part of why we're in this scenario is because you said technology automated a lot, so HR now have time to do strategic stuff. So there's still, you reckon, too much for the managers, yeah?
Well, I reckon it's because the part that is taken away by the templates and AI is the routine part, which leaves the line manager with all the non-routine parts
What's a
that
non-routine?
they
Give us an example.
haven't
In-
been trained for.
In the example of performance, what's the non-routine?
Sure. A routine approach to performance management would look specifically at what the outcomes of performance are, right? You haven't been returning your sales calls, or your sales amounts have declined, or I'm noticing absenteeism. The non-routine part of that is learning the why.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
we
The
often,
root cause,
yeah,
as opposed to on the surface.
yeah.
Tit for tat. It's more about really fundamentally what's going on with this employee. How can we take them from being average to great? Yeah.
Yeah. And, even in what we were just talking about, we were automatically thinking it was something about the employee, right? Maybe it's something about the tools that they have. Maybe there's some problem with the expectations that the sales clients have. Maybe it's a problem with our training program that we haven't taught employees how to do these things. Those kinds of diagnostics, they're not routine. And they require a certain level of knowledge and sensitivity and experimentation and investigation. And
Experience.
those are hard things to do.
Experience.
Yeah.
Right. And experience.
I think experience is a big part, but, I'm a scientist, I'm a professor. And so I believe that experience matters. I think instinct matters. But I think the other thing is knowing when your instinct is wrong. And your experience can lead you down a certain road and say, when I've seen these performance
Tunnel
problems before, yeah, exactly. You're always expecting it to be the way it was. And that's one of the things that I think research contributes to management is we can show you where your instincts are bad, where your instinct is wrong. Can I give you an example?
Yes, please. This is fascinating.
Okay, so one of the things that we study in management is how to design work. How do you make work motivating and challenging? And where there have to be dozens
Design, work design, job design. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. There must be dozens of theories, but they boil down to a few basic principles. We know that work is a lot more motivating when people have the chance to use lots of different skills and talents on the job. We know that jobs are more motivating when you're able to see work from start to finish, when you actually finish something and show a product. You know this from software design,
100%.
right? We also know that work is more motivating when people test their own work and do their own kind of quality control than handing it over to somebody else who says that was good or bad. So these are basic principles, right? They can be taught. They're taught all the time. One of my colleagues does an exercise in her class where she gives students a bunch of tasks and she tells them, you're responsible for putting these tasks into a job that you are going to perform. When those are the instructions, people spontaneously apply job design principles and they design a motivating job. They use all these different skills. They design a job that goes from start to finish. They do their own quality control. If she changes the instructions, just one little tweak to say, you're putting these tasks together for jobs that other people are going to do, they ignore the principles. So this person's good at this one thing, they're going to do that all day. This person's good at building, they're going to build it, and I'm going to ask somebody else to test it. All those principles go out the window because the moment you are instructed to design a job for others, you're thinking, how do I do it to be most efficient? And the way I make it efficient is to have people do the same thing over and over, the thing that they're good at. So that's what I love about the work that I do is, pay attention to these things because your instincts will lead you astray if you're not kind of thinking about the employee, if you're not able to put yourself in the employee's position. But, you've gotten me started on managers.
Yes, please. Keep going.
Line managers, I think, are just so underappreciated in organizations.
All right. So this is where we're at, the point you're at right now, just to reframe where we're at. You're saying because of system efficiencies and and automations and stuff. HR now, 80-90% of all the admin work they used to do is being automated, which is really what sort of our platform does. Now they have time to do strategic work, and because of that, there's
HR professionals are doing strategic HR
the
work.
HR, yes,
Yeah.
the HR professionals, in an
Yeah.
organization. So therefore, the line managers in those organizations now have got they have more responsibility to interact with their employees and do things that maybe HR used to do, and such as performance reviews and all that. And the point you're at right now is you believe and you want to talk about the changing role of that manager and the extra responsibilities and whatever, the good and bad that comes with all that, right? Is that where we're at?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I often ask when I'm in a group of managers is I ask them to remember a time when they were maybe 9 or 10 and a grown-up said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I asked them, how many of you said, "When I grow up, I want to be a manager"? Nobody raises their hand.
It's
Nobody raises their
more
hand.
of a creative thing, engineer, an artist, a singer,
Yeah, or astronaut, or dancer, or almost anything.
the actual function, not a manager.
Exactly. And so
Interesting.
manager is such an unusual job because it's a role that people sort of get into by accident. We
Yeah.
even use this term, accidental manager. They
Yeah.
just fall into
Yes.
it. So my brother-in-law, as soon as he graduated from university, he got a job selling steel products to corporate customers.
Sure.
He was so good at it because he's the kind of person who can forge relationships very quickly.
Sure.
So he'd find out what customers' needs were. He was really good at this. He was so good at it that he got promoted to sales manager.
Yeah.
But nobody taught him how to hire people.
Yeah.
Nobody taught him how to do performance reviews.
Yep.
And certainly nobody taught him how to tell people who were performing well that they were getting laid off because steel products were in decline. And I think that's true in so many organizations. We put all of this responsibility on line managers without giving them the appropriate support.
So you're talking about a lot of managers. Would you have a percentage of the people that, everybody, how many managers, if anything, to your point, Carol, I so agree with you because I'm one of them, accidental managers, right? I was a developer. I'm the founder of the company. I built the first iteration of the software. Now I don't program anymore, but that's how I started. I never did an MBA or management training and all that. So how many people...
And even if you had done it, you probably would have focused on the finance and marketing pieces of it. You might not have thought about the management piece because you would have said, that's just common sense.
Got it. So what does that even mean? How many of the managers out there actually being formally trained on how to manage people, to your point?
So
tiny.
So if you, and I'll tell you two statistics that scare me. These are the things that keep me up at night. The Wall Street Journal reported an analysis that was done of the U.S. labor market over a 3-year period. And what they found was that among people who were promoted into their first managerial role, 29% left in the first month.
Ooh.
It's staggering, isn't it?
Wow.
Like, that's a lot of people.
I didn't know that.
It's enormous.
I thought people could not wait for the opportunity and they make it work and it works.
And here's the other side of that. In surveys that were done in the U.S., but also here in Australia, 60% of new entrants, so people who are going for their first job, say they never want to be a manager. They just want to be an individual contributor their entire careers. That's how unattractive we have made these roles.
We have one of them here. He's a developer, but we promoted him to the head of the implementation team. He's done it for 2-3 years. He just told me in the last sort of 6 months he want to go back to be a developer. And we are literally finding his replacement to move him back into full development.
And I think this happens all the time. And the reason it worries me so much is organizations, workplaces, they were always the second space, right? Outside of your family, workplaces were the environment where you developed relationships, where
Okay.
you found yourself, where you
Sure.
developed an identity, where you got your tribe, right? Where you made
Sure.
those connections. And we know that organizations are much less sticky than they used to be.
Sure.
Onboarding is more likely to be virtual. Onboarding used to be the place where there was somebody else sitting next to you who was stuck in that lecture room for the whole day, but who wasn't part of your team. They were part of another unit.
Okay.
But because you spent the whole day side by side going, God, isn't this boring?
Yeah.
And you had a friend for the rest of your career. Okay, we are eliminating a lot of those opportunities, which means that the one relationship that really matters in organizations is you and your line manager.
Mm-hmm.
And we support them so little.
Okay. So you're saying, and one of the things you're advocating here, you seem to be, I'm not speaking for you, please correct me if I'm wrong. The line managers need to be supported. They are not supported enough. And in particular, if you were to summarize the kind of expertise and skills that where you feel they need to be supported, what would that be?
In every area of people management. But here's a place where I would start. What we've talked about so far is that line managers have a need. And so I've sort of presented them as the ones who need help. But I just want to sort of flip that and emphasize that it's not altruism, it actually makes the organization better
Of course.
if we can help these people
Of
do
course.
their
Yeah,
jobs.
no doubt about that.
Which is why the example I want to give you has to do with training and development. Organizations tell me all the time that the pace of learning has really increased. I work in a university, and one of the things we're told by managers all the time is, I can't wait for somebody to earn a degree. It has to be done in real time. It has to be, they learn this as we need it, right? So it has to be a much more rapid pace. So great. Organizations are designing lots of employee-centered learning programs. What we know, though, is that people really suck at knowing how to learn. People have a hard time knowing what it is they need to learn. We often think we're better at things than we are. We rush through the basics because we're so eager to get to the good stuff. We don't practice enough, so we don't develop the skills.
Okay.
So as a result, in organizations, lots of training is wasted. We train the employee and they test well on it right then, but when they go back to the job, they're not practicing, they're not getting the skills up to a higher level, and they just revert back to their old habits. Now, the critical factor there is the line manager, right? It really takes your line manager saying, Anwar, tell me about what you learned in training last week. Show me what you learned. Anwar, I'm going to give you an extra week on that project because I really want you to start using these new tools in doing it. And then when you make a mistake, you want that line manager to say, you know what? It's okay. You made a mistake today, but I'm really proud of you for trying to use these new skills. But nobody, when they're designing the training program, is designing in the slack for that manager to do it, right? They haven't said, in order for your employees to, get up to speed, we're going to give you a little more slack in your own KPIs. So the moment you come back from the training program, your line manager saying, get on with it. I had to do without you last week while you were in training. Now we have to do all this catch up. So it's really about making sure that line managers are part of the whole strategy. And we seem to just forget that layer.
We're designing training programs that aren't for purpose in the environment where that line manager is implementing it within their teams and how it can be effectively integrated.
I really like your mention of the environment. We are designing training programs that very much have the learner in mind. We aren't always thinking about the learner in context.
Yeah, it's the whole environment. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so the question was the areas where you believe the line managers need support. What else comes to mind?
Well, One topic that I think is really interesting is employee retention and turnover.
Which is a huge
Shall we
topic.
talk about that?
Yeah.
Whew. So in the work that I do, one of the biggest, like, kind of mind-blowing things is how we've changed our understanding of why people leave organizations. So back when I was in graduate school, most turnover theories focused on job dissatisfaction. Why do people leave? It's because we have this little satisfaction meter in our head, and more dissatisfied, we hit a threshold and we say, oh, I'm dissatisfied, I'm going to start looking for a new job.
Okay.
Right? Turns out most of us are pretty lazy. We don't really monitor our dissatisfaction very often. We only do that when events happen. And in most organizations, most turnover can be tied to a specific event.
Interesting. I can understand that, actually.
We use the term shock, but it's not necessarily a surprise. It can be predictable, but it is a jolt, like an earthquake kind of thing, a tremor. And a shock could be something like you get an unexpected call from a recruiter. You weren't thinking about leaving, but, oh, well, gee, here's this unexpected opportunity. Maybe I should think about it. But it could also be something like winning the lottery. And you go, oh, wait, now I don't have to work for pay. Maybe I should think about how much I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. I thought you gave a example when we were talking earlier. My son is living in Singapore. Does that change how I'm feeling about the work that I'm doing? Maybe you or your partner fall pregnant. So it could be any sort of event. And sometimes these things are very planned and predictable. Maybe the employee said, I've always had this dream of getting admitted into music school. And now that I've been admitted, I'm going to quit my job. So these are all shocks. These are sort of individual moments, right?
Well, you compare notes with someone doing similar role in a different company, different country, or whatever, different environment. You go, wow, the conditions are so much better there.
Yeah.
Whether it's pay, not necessarily the whole thing, but the kind of engagement. You feel that this person is passionate and engaged, and you go, oh my God, I'm missing that in my life. What's going on here?
And I was going to say that the shock could be something as small as going to happy hour with somebody who's just gotten a new job.
Yeah.
Right? So anything that sort of makes you do that monitor and that sort of thinking. But you can see how different that is, right? It's not this slow, long process where, HR can intervene somewhere along the way and do some course correction.
Would you say those certain events, those shock and events, they make you reevaluate? Yeah?
Exactly. Now, in those situations, the organization has very few options. Everything they can do to reduce shock-related turnover needed to happen 5 years earlier.
It's so true. It's too late. Yeah.
So the things that you're doing in onboarding to develop relationships and connections, the things you've been doing about career development, that was all done long ago. So
Absolutely.
So now pretty much the only thing you can do.
We talked about the compare. I'm sorry, I used the example of the compare note. Sorry to cut you off, Professor Carol. I talked about the compare note. You want your employee to be the other employee, the one that shocks the other person, how satisfied and happy they are, as opposed to the reverse. And that, you're right, starts 5 years ago.
And if you haven't done those things, or if you've done those things, anything that's left over, you just have to accept graciously. You have to say, I did the best I could, but now you're leaving and I need to just accept this. So let me give you a specific example. Lululemon, the company, right?
Very
leisure,
vague,
leisure wear, right? Athletic wear. Yeah. Most of the people who go to work in a Lululemon store as salespeople, they don't anticipate a 20-year career in the company. Most of them are there waiting to open their own Pilates studio.
Okay.
Or to become a personal trainer.
Okay.
So they're waiting for this shock, this jolt, this event that will move them into the role that they really want.
So I didn't know anything about that. So you're saying people that work in the stores of those leisure wear or training
Yeah.
wear, whatever, they normally come from the health industry, the personal trainers and
Or
aspiring to be in,
they're
etc.
hoping
Gym
to get into
enthusiasts,
that,
yeah.
right? So they don't come and take that job because they aspire to a career in sales or even to a career in management in those kinds of
Some of them
stores.
might, but you're
Just,
saying
you know,
decent big chunk of it is
mhm.
they come from that industry, the health and exercising stuff. They haven't found their real position in that industry. They're on their way. It's a transitional kind of role for them, yeah?
Exactly. Transitional is a beautiful word. So we have to anticipate that they're going to leave. But once you know that, once you recognize that, you say, well, that's actually a good thing, right? Because when they leave, they're part of our ecosystem. When they go off and become a personal trainer,
Right.
they're
Oh my
going to be
God.
wearing Lululemon clothes, and their clients are going to say, "Hey, where'd you get those really cool yoga pants?" You know, and so we really want to think
You want them to be ambassadors when they are
exactly
in that
so.
industry.
Beautiful word. Beautiful word. So once we accept this idea of shock-related turnover, like it really changes the way you think about retention and turnover. Some
Yeah.
turnover you just have to accept.
Got
But you want to change the relationship.
Yeah.
It's not the end. It's a transition.
Got
It's a
it.
change.
So that's something you said before at that termination, the vendetta or whatever. Oh my God,
yeah.
this is beautifully
Yep.
segued into that.
So I'll come back to that, but let me give you one more example, just because I just think examples make it so vivid. I was in the United States at a McDonald's in May. So most graduations are happening in May. And this McDonald's had photos of all of its employees who were graduating from high school up on the walls. Big, glamorous photos,
That's so cool.
professional photo shots. And I think that's a really good example as
That's
well.
beautiful.
High school students who go to work for McDonald's, they don't expect to be working there when they're 30 years old.
No.
But what a beautiful thing for the organization to do, because 20 years from now, when those graduates have a family and they bring them to McDonald's, they're going to tell them this story.
That's
right?
what I mean.
So it's so meaningful.
That's what I mean. I mean, you inspired me to say what I said before. This whole thing about, at that termination, to make sure you don't do things out of vendetta, out of, it's really interesting point what you're talking about. To realize, to accept that some things you couldn't control, and make sure this relationship ends on good terms. So those women we were talking about working in that the clothing,
Lululemon.
health and fitness clothing thing, they become naturally, without even being paid, those ambassadors for you, promoting your brand. And those kids at McDonald's, they become those natural ambassadors promoting your brand in the community. But you're saying even further from that, their own kids, they have positive views about maybe McDonald's is not that bad or whatever, which is priceless. That's
It's
at
huge.
the heart of the community.
It's huge.
That's
right?
millions of these kids every year integrated in the community, saying McDonald's isn't that bad. I've worked there. It's a good place. You can be.
My dad told me this
Yep.
story about how much they supported him when he was in high school.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. As you say, it's priceless. Now, the success of all of this hinges on this one-line manager saying the right thing at the right moment.
Right.
And so when I come to you and I say, boss,
Yeah.
I've got this other opportunity,
Yeah.
it's what I've always dreamed of, I'm going. It's very hard for you to say, congratulations, I'm proud of you. Because in your head, you're thinking, man, I have spent the last 3 years
Yeah.
training you up, and now I have to go and convince the
Yeah.
organization to help me hire something. Like, my job sucks. Like that's your immediate reaction, right? That's really hard.
A senior recruiter friend of this company who used the platform in 2 separate organizations where he worked as a head of recruitment. And he's been on this podcast before, said something at a live webinar. I had webinar with lots of users and HR folks, and there was a panel. He was on the panel. He said something that shocked me, stayed in my mind. I always think about it now. He's basically saying, look, you guys, you all think about hiring, it's a 3, 5, 10-year journey. I think about it 12 months. If this person stays for 12 months, I am very impressed. And I go, is this guy crazy? And I kept thinking about it, and I started to see the merits of all that. I'm actually practice that when I'm talking to people, when I'm making the decision. If in my mind I go, they might be leaving in about a year or two, and go, so what? If they can be super motivated and work hard for the next 12 months, if you can create an environment where someone can make a big impact within 12 months, you become really competitive, because the days are gone where you expect someone to be here for 5 years before they add value or I meant produce good return.
I agree with everything you just said, and I'll add one more layer on
Yes,
it.
please.
It becomes even more important then to know, where are they going after that next 12 months?
And that's the whole ambassador thing again. Oh
Yeah.
my
Are
God.
they going
I
to a
forgot about
competitor?
that. Yeah.
Are they going to a supplier?
Yes.
Am I able to keep them as a customer?
Yeah.
Are they able to give me referrals
Yeah.
to the employee who's going to replace them?
Yeah.
I mean, this changes the whole mindset about what is our relationship with employees. You know, there was a Wall Street Journal article yesterday that was, the tide has turned. The labor market's not so tight anymore. So managers are starting to warn everybody, you're replaceable. Like, I don't have to offer all those perks anymore. And I thought, oh my God, this is so short-sighted of you. You know, the whole thing that you should be thinking about is, what's going to make my business sustainable over the long run. And in order to do that, you have to think beyond this idea that employees only matter when they're working for you. What happens when they leave is really, really critical.
Not many people think like that.
Mind-blowing, right?
That is mind-blowing. Carol, not even 5% of managers or even HR professionals would think this way. Although so much literature about that. I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I've even written a blog that talks about when I interviewed someone who specializes in EVP, an HR practitioner. And as part of the EVP, the example you use are, if you were Coca-Cola and people come interact with your ads and the recruitment process, if you don't treat them nicely, these are the people that drink your Coke and consume your product. You want them to walk away from that role, from that interview process, forming a positive view still about the business, about the brand, So we all talk about it and stuff, but when it comes to practice, I genuinely think, as you said, when that person comes to you and says, I'm going to resign, all that's out of the window probably. You don't think like that anymore.
And this is where I think about line managers in 2 ways. One is, that's a non-routine thing, right? People don't quit every day. Hopefully, if you've been a good manager.
Sure.
And so part of the training that you need as a manager to say, right now, today, before anybody quits, what are you going to do? Like, what's your script? What's the first thing you're going to say? Practice that script. Think about what your offboarding ritual is going to be. Think about how you can celebrate this exit in a positive way so that it's reinforcing in a positive event for the employees who choose to stay. Because, of course, they're watching your every move when this person is exiting. So that's one piece, is the training that the line manager gets. But the other thing that I think about is, how do we reward or punish managers for exits? So there's a company in the UK, they're like an electronics store. And within this company, a manager gets a bonus if they train up an employee who goes and becomes a manager at another store in the company.
Okay.
So I think that's a lovely incentive,
think
right?
so.
Like, it's motivating you to do this training. Now, think if you could multiply that. What if it wasn't just training up an employee who got a better job at your company?
Oops.
But what if you invested so much in this employee that they went to work for a supplier and now became a bridge between that supplier and your business?
Part of the shock, however, I really would like you to address something there, because we would be dishonest if we don't address it. I think part of the shock, a line manager, that negative shock when someone says, I want to resign, is because you get this thing, that feeling that they might be going to work for a competitor.
Yeah.
So if we don't address this point, we would be dishonest. I mean, you're talking
Mm-hmm.
now about working for a supplier or
In the
something.
supply
That's really
chain.
positive. That's great. But how
Mm-hmm.
about if they're working for a competitor and they take with them a lot of IP and whatever? That's the first thing that comes to
Mm-hmm.
mind. So
Right.
address that. Why do you then still expect that manager to be positive and cool and whatever? So
Well, again, I think that it's not just in that moment, but it's about what's been happening over the last 5 years, right? So I think that there's an awful lot of learning to be grasped in that moment. So what is it that makes your competitor such a better job than the one you have?
that's so true.
So suddenly now you've got a
So
conduit,
true.
right? It's
So it falls in that same category. Started 5 years ago.
Yeah, and we know that whenever there's a shock to the system, it, the the relationships will keep a person. But once one of those strings starts fraying, it's hard for the net to hold. Right? So once one employee leaves, other employees become more tempted.
Mm.
So that employee is giving you a gift when they leave, right? They're telling you what's wrong in your system
Yes.
so that you can tie up those
So that's
knots.
that shock moment for you. So the initial shock that we
Exactly,
talked about, the
exactly.
employee
Yes, yes.
maybe exchanging note with someone they met in a
Mhm.
different country, in a different
Mm.
company in the same role, and they go, "Whoa, I'm missing out. I'm not passionate in my life. I'm not engaged in my role, although it's my
Mhm.
profession and I care about it. And this person is vibrant and enjoying themselves. I want to be like that." So
Yes.
that's the same thing. When that happens, you should reflect as a manager and say, "This is a moment of awakening for me. What are we doing wrong here as a company? Why? What can we learn from why this person left?"
Yes. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. The only thing that I would add to it is I wish organizations would create that safe space for a manager to do it, right? You're speaking from the heart, right? That as a manager, I want to use this as a learning moment.
Yeah. You're
But
saying that's oppressed by execs above the managers and whatever. They don't give them that room. They don't let them speak
I think
with their
that
peers and with their, as I said, with the execs about, listen, guys, we might be doing something wrong here. I'm seeing a bit of a trend here, or this could become a trend from what I've learned.
Mhm.
You're saying that could be oppressed, yeah?
I think it could be
Because it's highlighting major problems, those too inconvenient for those execs.
Because an awful lot of organizations are still very top down,
Mm.
right? We often think about line managers as being the implementers. And so when they say, well, I've been implementing what you've told me to do, but it's not enough, that can sometimes be a hard message to get up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's inconvenient for those execs. It's finding holes in their strategy, and it's not something they want to work on right now or want anybody to hear about. It's 18 months down the road, it's 2 years down the road, and they oppress those kind of conversations.
And a lot of times the line manager is the canary in the coal mine, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
the HR professional isn't yet seeing exits in large enough numbers that it's raising red flags for them. But as an individual
Yeah.
line manager, they can say, yes, but at that moment of exit, when I say, why are you leaving? This is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and that's why the employer value proposition it's something that takes a long time and needs to be engaged all the way to the CEO and the board. Otherwise, because the changes could be really fundamentals, like what we just
Absolutely.
said. When that line manager, being the canary in the mine, says, "Look, we have a serious problem that requires the whole company to work on it together to eliminate, because this problem is creating a trend of we're going to be losing certain talents or not being able to attract certain talents that are critical to our success going forward." Um, if they don't have the buy-in and the support from all the way to the board, those kind of problems can never be fixed. It becomes soft, small changes, changing the branding, changing the ad, and thinking we're going to solve the problem. All of a sudden, women going to come and work for us, or we're going to attract women engineers to work on some mining site somewhere, which is what some mining company wanted to do, to be able to find, workforce in WA and stuff. It needs to be fundamental changes that requires everybody all the way through to the top to be part of. I see what you mean. Very
And you can see
interesting.
how in this conversation, suddenly line managers are center stage. They're critical.
Yes.
They have information that we can't get any other way.
Yeah.
They are a critical link in the chain that maybe we're not paying enough attention to. Like it concerns me that so few people want to be managers. It says
So
that
you're
we're
the
not valuing them.
so you're the line manager champion.
You can put that on my tombstone. Yes,
Oh
I'd
my
be
God.
delighted. Yeah.
This is unbelievable.
Mm.
This is incredible. I really never understood you 100% or understood your mission in a sense at high level clearly. That this is what you're saying. You're saying those line managers. And what's interesting about your mission, the fact that it's affecting almost 90% of every manager, because we both agreed probably 90% of them are accidental managers,
That's right.
starting from me,
Mm.
right? And so you're the champion of 90% of the economy.
And I think that so many line managers, they're just self-taught, right? They're kind of just desperate
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
information.
Just like me.
Mm.
Bits and pieces from here, from there, from a
Yeah.
podcast, from this, from that, which is great. This doesn't need to stop at all. But all we're saying is you've got to really understand that you could be missing out on a lot of things here.
Right. And part of what concerns me is we can put the information out there, but the horse has to want to drink.
Yes.
Right? You can put the water. And so it really does require a line manager even wearing that self-identity
Yes.
to say, yeah, I'm about people.
Yes.
This is not just part of my job. It is the job.
Yes.
And even if I'm in a work environment that isn't valuing that, I know I'm making a difference.
Mm.
And so one of the things I think is really interesting is some of the research that's coming out now that shows that managers who do invest in themselves, who become better leaders, they actually have better careers. It does get rewarded.
To
It's
me-
just that it's much more onus on them to make it happen.
Yeah, a lot of managers who are, as I said, I'm one of them, the accidental managers, which is 90% of every manager out there at every level in the tree. They get promoted, and it gets to their head that they've been promoted for a reason. Clearly, there was a reason, and I'm sure they absolutely deserving of that, starting from myself. So really, I'm not being speaking in any negative way, but it can get to your head to think, because this company recognized I need to be a manager, that means I've got it all. Not really realizing that, look, you are an accidental manager. Nothing's wrong with that, but you just need to be aware of that. You've got to complement the functional knowledge about the job and what your employees will be going through during the function of the job, which is why you've been promoted or part of it. But this needs to be complemented big time, to the tune of me even 50-50 with the people skills, with how to manage people, how to motivate people, how to manage performance manage people, all these things. You have a meeting with an exec or a couple of meetings with your execs, and you see them behaving a certain way or talking a certain way in a meeting, and you copy that or replicate that, and you think that's it, you've made it.
Mm-hmm.
You've become this kind of manager. You can now behave in a meeting in a certain way. This is lipstick on a pig. This is very shallow stuff.
Well, and I also think there's a problem that you're absolutely right that most people learn to manage by watching somebody who
Yeah,
managed them, right? So you
100%.
replicate that behavior. But I think it's really important to recognize that this is not your manager's organization, right? The world has changed since they became a manager. So, for example, right now you are managing people in virtual environments that your manager never had to,
Carol,
had to work in.
this is such an interesting point. I really would like you to zoom on this point, because can I share with you some experience? Really is so interesting. I had to unlearn a lot of things from bad managers. I had a couple of bad investors that I had to interact with for a fair bit of time. And thanks God they're no longer involved in the company as investors. And I had a bunch of bad managers. They were one of the worst, most horrible people as managers or as leaders. They were creating politics. They would make fun behind people's back. They were racist. They were everything. Like, it's horrible right now. But at that time, I was so part of the aura that they are the managers, because I was new. still in my early 20s, and I thought because they are a manager, they must be right. They must be doing something right. After the years, I've started to realize how bad they were. I had to unlearn. I actually copied some of that stuff automatically. It was horrible. At least 5 people that influenced me in the wrong way. So that proves your point, even magnifies your point 1,000 times over.
I think that's really true. And I think that we are not about teaching managers to do something a particular way, but to understand how their behavior impacts employees. And then you can find a good way to make it work.
So talk to us a little bit then about this topic that I'm so passionate about, the difference between a manager and a leader. Because, you want to be championing you're the champion for the line managers. And clearly, although, some people argue, which is so incorrect, but I'm just saying some people might argue you just need one leader, which is the CEO, and everybody else is just a manager executing. That's rubbish. Everybody needs to be their own leader. And even a team leader, like at the level of 2-3 people in a team, that team leader needs to exhibit certain leadership qualities, let alone a line manager that's managing 50 or 100 people in the department. So please talk to us about that a bit.
So it's such a difficult question, and it's particularly a difficult question for somebody who works in a university.
Okay.
Because one of the things that we've seen over time is that our course titles have even drifted from management to leadership. Leadership is more attractive to students. It's a better marketing tool. It is seen as more visionary, more strategic, more prestigious, a much more sort of positive thing.
Oh, okay.
But the risk of that is that it becomes something special and isolated. And, only some people can be leaders. You're a born leader, right? Because you're the one with the vision. So I sometimes say that I'm really not that interested in leadership with a big L, but I'm really interested in leadership with a little L.
I really love the way you put it.
The things that you're doing in your manager role, of course, you're leading. You're front and center. You're very visible.
This is so cool. I'm sorry. I'm too passionate about the topic. I've interrupted you there. I apologize.
It's an important one. I'm so glad you brought it up.
I love the small L and the big L. So if we talk about this example of the team leader with only, let's say 5, so him and 4 people, just a tiny unit, just a team leader, not a big title, nothing. So he's actually on the job as well, on the tools.
And their responsibility probably is more facilitating.
Sure. So tiny. I'm just saying. I'm making it all the way to the bottom, to the speaking about the small L. Let's talk about the small L. So it's a team leader, meaning they are actually doing the job. So, for example, in programming, we have the team leader who's actually still doing programming, but also helping his team. Typically, about 3 to 4 people max on their team. So that's the tiniest leader. He's not even a manager, right? So it's really. They need to be a leader, but they don't need to stand up on a podium and speak. It's the leadership qualities they exhibit in every single behavior and every touch point with their people on an hour-by-hour basis, isn't it?
And thank you.
That's the small L's, right?
Yes, and thank you so much because you just led into another distinction I wanted to make, which is, leadership is about behaviors, right? It's what the individual does. Manager, to me, encaptures some of the things about the system that the system can do to support that person.
Yeah.
So a manager has performance reviews of their own, right? Their performance is being evaluated. They work within a reward system. They were hired with certain sort of qualities. So we need to design management systems to put people into roles called managers so they can exhibit leadership behavior. So to me, leading is really about behaviors, and managers is about a role.
You walk into a team. I want to break this down. I want to really be able to talk about it if you're okay with that for the next half an hour. It's such an interesting topic. I don't know how to say this, but I want to say it. I went to New Zealand the first time in a holiday settings as opposed to meetings. Where you jump in a cab at the airport and you go into pretty much the boardroom. You don't see anybody else. And back at the airport, done that 10, 15 times. But the first time was about a year and a half that I went for a whole week. You're in the community, you're interacting with the community, etc. And within hardly a day or two, I've noticed there was a difference in New Zealand compared to Australia, how they deal with people who aren't white in a better way. I'm not saying they're perfect. Probably someone could be saying relative to other country, they're not even good enough or whatever. I'm not saying who's perfect or not. I'm just saying noticeably better. It shocked me. Within a day or two, I could see it. You walk into a cafe, there's a team of Asian girls and boys and managers and whatever, or Maori people, whatever. The way they're interacting with each other, it was more respectful, and there was no kind of, because this guy's white, he's the leader, or people that look up to, or whatever. There was there was better. I'm not saying it's perfect. It was better. So this is, to me, a team leader with those 4 or 5 people. These are some of the things they can exhibit, and because they are setting the model. They are setting what's acceptable and not acceptable in this team. And if every team leader, if everybody's doing that in that little L's in that company, those 20, 30, 50,000 little teams, that is leadership.
That's where the magic happens. Yeah.
We don't need that guy to stand at the podium and give us a lecture every morning. Guys, before you start work, the CEO needs to talk to us 5 minutes to tell us how we're going to behave every day. No, those little L's happening everywhere, every hour, is when, if they exhibit leadership qualities, they role model these things. It's really so fascinating.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think is really difficult for organizations is translating values, which is something that leadership at the big L expresses, into day-to-day behaviors, and so even a word like respect or inclusion.
Yes.
But what does that look like on the ground?
Yes.
And that's one of
on the ground. That's the little L, yeah?
Exactly. And that's what you're hoping that your team leader will display, and will display it in a way that enables team members who aren't even in that role to do it.
Yeah.
So an example. So I'm really into this sort of value-based leadership. Like how do we get it out there?
Value-based, okay.
And I had an organization that we were working with, and they were a public sector organization, and they had like 5 core values that public servants should display. And so they instituted this policy that on every meeting agenda, didn't matter what the meeting was, at the very top, the 5 values would be listed, and the meeting couldn't go on to the first agenda item until someone in the group gave an example from the past week of seeing the values in action. And I said, well, how did it work? And employees said, for the first 2 weeks, it was so painful because people would sit in the meeting and try not to make eye contact, and they didn't have any examples, and, they really wanted to get on to the business at hand. But eventually it worked so well that employees would be out in the field, and one employee would say, did you see that? Did you see how Catherine was proactive in suggesting that? Nobody can have that. That's my example that I'm bringing into the meeting. Catherine being proactive in the field.
Okay.
And I thought, what a fabulous example that is, that now in every meeting, we're trying to showcase these very small examples of here's what this behavior looks like.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about your example about, we've got all of these different customers, all of these different employees. Maybe a customer comes in who doesn't have English as a first language. What does respect look like there? And, just to make those things really concrete. We know that that's how we build cultures, is not for employees to hear words, but to have really specific examples that they can follow.
Yeah. My gosh, I can talk about this for the next 20 days.
I love this distinction between management and leadership, though. I think it's really important. I think that sometimes one of the things that limits accidental managers is they say, well, I don't want to be CEO.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a leader. You know,
Bullshit.
so I think sometimes
Such a misconception.
sometimes they're automatically thinking big
Yeah.
L, and they
Yeah.
don't appreciate the impact that they're
Yes.
having on the ground.
Yes.
And that's just another reason why we should be celebrating what they're doing.
But to be honest, you're absolutely right, and that's why they need a champion like you to remind them about these things.
Mhm.
You know, they don't know it. But to be honest, also the maturity of the organization should have made them aware of that. When you promote someone, you speak with them about that. The big L should be speaking to them about the small L's. He's
Yes.
expecting these small L's to be flourishing as happening every single minute of every day.
Mhm.
They can be part of that change and that awareness when that person's promoted. So also, it does take that the level of maturity in that organization, right?
It does. It does.
And their own journey, if they really want to be a leader, if they do enjoy leadership, if they do enjoy being a manager, being a successful manager. And I think after a little while, you've got to be a robot if you don't realize that to be successful in your role as a manager, I'm going to call it manager, it is definitely leader and a manager. They go hand in hand. They cannot be separated, right? To be successful, you have to. You're missing some things. You feel that it's tough. It's like against the flow of the river. You're going upstream all the time. Everything is a struggle. Why? Something is missing, and you could be in that machine and not talking to anybody and think it's all normal for years. Again, your organization is not, supporting you to make you realize it and stuff like that, and you're not talking to anyone. And then simple things like that, people like yourself, Professor, from your work, and if you make them aware, but you maybe you're not aware of this little thing. And these kind of fine tunes and awareness, and then they go on a journey to learn these things, could make life become so easy, and it becomes satisfying from being like hell. So you get promoted, right? Do you think you're going to tell the wife and the kids that I'm not really enjoying that promotion? You've been working for 10, 15 years. You're at the age of 35, 40 even, and you got the promotion. You think you're going to tell people you're not worthy of the promotion or things going well? Some people do, it depends on the relationship stuff, but most of the time, you don't know how to diagnose it. The company doesn't have the maturity to have talked to you and understood it already and talk to you about it. You don't have a champion like Carol supporting you, or what Carol wants the organization to have to support you. So you're not being supported, and you think you're going to tell the wife, I'm failing at this promotion? You're going to keep it inside. You're going to have a hell of a ride. It's going to be like hell for the next few years.
Anwar, if my father was sitting next to me here at this podcast, he would say, why should it be fun? What made you think you were going to like it?
Oh my God.
Work, it's work, right? So I think it's a relatively recent concept,
Yes.
even that we should find work satisfying and meaningful, that should be the rule, not the exception. And in the kind of work that I do, what I'm most passionate about is we can design systems that achieve both. I think we have an awful lot of organizations that were designed for efficiency.
Let's take some examples about this accidental manager who's listening right now, because you mentioned that our users and our listeners are mostly HR, which is you're quite correct. However, I would say also tons of managers. So to give you an idea, Professor Carol, in an organization, a typical client, let's say 1,000 people client, there would be about the main users, the heavy users. I mean, everybody's a user at some level, every employee, but the main users, about 60 to 75. And that's an HR team of about 6-7 people in a 1,000 people company, you would imagine. And so that's 7-8 people in HR, and every manager and line manager and an exec is a user. So therefore, both the HR team, all the HR folks, and all the leadership are sort of what I would like to think audience and stuff. So if these guys are listening and they connected with what we've just said, how they think for that job to be like hell and so tough is part of the job, and we're saying, hold on, you might want to reconsider that, buddy. work can be good for you, should be good for you. You know, a few tweaks that maybe you haven't realized that you've been promoted because you're a solid operator at the function of the job. You know the industry, you know the client base, whatever the environment that you're really solid at. But this whole managing people and started to feel that you've got responsibility to behave in a leadership way. These are maybe new things for you. You might need to read up and start on that journey and be supported with that. Let's take some examples for them to start to connect with us even better if they are listening, right? You it gets to your head and you're sitting in a meeting and all of a sudden you're not listening to your people. You're not acknowledging when they're right, and when you're wrong, you don't say enough. Oh shit, I'm wrong. You've completely showed me that I'm wrong. This is brilliant. I take everything I said back. I'm so sorry. Let's start again. What James said is perfect. Let's start from this point, etc. Just to be humble like that and realize that you're facilitating. You don't have to be, because you've been promoted now, you're the manager, you know everything. You have to be right all the time. I mean, simple things like that, which comes down to what awesome people like yourself have taught me in the last 6 months about psychological safety, is for people to be able to feel that they can speak their mind and they can be acknowledged when they're right, as opposed to you're going to pretend that they're wrong and show them that I don't want to talk about it right now, because they might prove you that you're wrong. I mean, it starts with things like that, because that creates anxiety and politics starts to happen. People start to talk in group behind your back, and man, point of no return. So can we talk about things like that?
So I'm thinking about kind of 3 steps. One is the step that you just described, and I think that's super important. I think it is very useful for a line manager to be really upfront with their team, what they know, what they don't know, when they've made a mistake. And I know that's really hard. It requires a certain amount of bravery, but once you've done it the first time, you get all kinds of credibility. So we have lots of examples of accidental managers, for example, who supervise people with technical skills, and the manager doesn't have those skills. And I know sometimes people can feel really vulnerable and say, ooh, I can't tell them what to do because they actually know more than I do, so I have to bluff it. Don't bluff it. Acknowledge it. Just say,
100%.
I'm here because I bring a certain skill
leadership
set.
behavior.
It is.
You're going to set the tone how people behave in that team.
And it's authenticity, right? So you're being very frank about what skills you have and what skills you don't have, and hopefully that means your employees will be more upfront with you. I think you really need to demonstrate your willingness to take feedback. And I think that that's a really hard time to develop in a team. That's a really difficult thing because we're used to respecting and following leaders. We're not very good at criticizing them in a positive and respectful way. So I think you have to create lots of different openings. So maybe it's not going to happen in the team meeting, but maybe you're going to say, write me a note when you think I've done something wrong. I promise that I'll think about it. So there are those things within the team meeting. The other thing that I often tell line managers is take an HR professional in your organization to lunch. Take them for a coffee, because I do think
a lot of people don't like this. A lot of people might rebel against this idea
about having lunch with an HR professional
because they don't have a lot of respect for the HR profession at all. It's not about that. It's about they think I'm good. I've been promoted because, number one, I'm good at the job function. I'm a senior person as an architect. So therefore, I know about the architect profession, industry, how to talk with clients and how to design things. I get this done. And also because I've been senior, I've helped a couple of, on a number of occasions, a small, a new junior architect, etc. And I've been promoted. And why do I need this kind of help?
Oh, I don't think you need to go to them and say, be my coach. I'm just saying, if you're new to this role, isn't it helpful to talk to somebody who got classroom training on it, who has the vocabulary for it. And, I don't think that you need to go to the HR professional with a specific problem. In fact, I would discourage that. But I would say learn how HR professionals think about things.
Okay.
Learn that when you say to an HR professional, what do you think is the most important thing in a team meeting? And they say psychological safety. You've got something now to Google. And you've got a vocabulary to use to sort of support your learning.
When I talked to you about that, I remember a couple of weeks back over the phone, you said to me, sort of, you wanted me to be aware that this is not everything, or it's over. I was over stressing the importance of it. Can you comment on what you said?
I think what I was reacting to, Anwar, is
not as if I'm disagreeing with you. I'm just giving you an opportunity to explain that point.
Absolutely. But as I remember the conversation, I remember that you said the number one thing is psychological safety.
Okay.
And where I get a little resistant is the number one thing. There are so many things. There are so many different ways to approach it. So I
not necessarily number one, but it's
super important.
Sure.
And as we were just talking about, it's displayed in so many different ways. Like another manager might think of that as just inclusion. Right? I'm trying to give people an opportunity to have input, and the idea of safety might not really come into it.
So difference, inclusion is just one aspect. It's not everything, right?
I think all of this is just one aspect of being a good leader and being a good manager.
Yeah.
So I get a little cringy or resistant
when someone says it's everything.
The number one.
It's everything.
Yeah, this is the thing that managers need to know. And I also know that there are some managers who, for lack of a better term, might think of themselves as sort of hard-boiled, right? And so psychological safety, like they might resist that sort of term. So again, I just sort of think about how can we make it really accessible to lots of different kinds of people.
Sorry, this is interesting. I really want to challenge you on that. How can you? And I know you are the champion of. I've learned so much from you. So no doubt in my mind, you are an incredible champion for the line managers. Why do you think we should be sugarcoating this? And how can you sugarcoat the fact that, listen, buddy, you've got to get on with it tomorrow? Every day you're wasting is very, very, very big mistake. The whole psychological safety, you've got to learn about it ASAP. You've got to start to practice it, put a strategy in place. So you're going to start to improve on it every single day. Why do you want to sugarcoat it? When you say accessible, what are you trying to do here?
So I don't think I'm sugarcoating it. I think I'm trying to give it a vocabulary that line manager will connect with better.
How do you deliver it to?
I'd call it role modeling. I'd call it learning how to do something by watching somebody else. I have a colleague who's
still not there with you yet.
I have a colleague who grew up in the UK, and her phrase is sitting next to Nellie. And she talks about how this is how people learned how to do jobs, not through any formal training program, but just by watching someone else do.
Sure, but what are we talking about here?
And so we're talking about line managers displaying the kinds of behaviors that they want their teams to display. And I don't know that you necessarily...
sometimes they're so wrong, and they don't know about this. They don't even know about that. They don't even understand that in their team, people aren't encouraged. They don't feel that they're encouraged to voice their opinion about things that are really bad.
Yeah.
And they don't even realize this is happening because they don't have the awareness or enough awareness about the topic, and it's going on for months, and people talking behind their back about this problem, and they're the only person in the room who doesn't know about that. How can you not want to shock them with that, to say to them, it's important in a meeting that people are able to say what's on their mind?
Yes, I agree with everything that you just said. My question is, and I'm an academic, I'm surprised I'm arguing this side of the table. I worry about academic jargon. I worry about terms like psychological safety that have a very specific scientific meaning that may actually be off-putting to the
Sure. I
audience
respect
that you're
that.
trying
It is
to
a pretty
reach.
strong word.
So we were just talking
Yeah.
a little bit ago about turnover, and I was telling you about how organizations need to do this stuff 5 years ago in order for it to matter now. I didn't use job embeddedness when we were talking about that. I didn't need to use that academic concept to communicate it to you. And that's the point that I'm trying to
Okay.
make, which is I don't disagree with the idea. I sometimes think that some of the labels we use aren't reaching the audience.
Fair enough.
And that's why I sort of think that something as straightforward as role modeling. If you want people to input ideas, you have to show it. You know, if you want people to say
You're talking to
unpopular
the line
things,
manager. You're saying role model. If you
To
sit
your
in a
team.
meeting, just simply when you sit in a meeting, if you want people to accept other ideas because you're trying to be creative, you want to try and invent a new product, whatever, you want people to speak about the idea regardless. Well, if someone laughs, you need to shut them down
Right.
and do not laugh about a bad idea. You're role modeling that, so then people don't. Is that you're saying that becomes more accessible?
I do. Or I would probably play with that person and say, how about the last time that you got shot down by your manager? You know, when was the last time you felt comfortable bringing some crazy off the wall idea to your manager? What did they do? Because to me, it's more important to try and get at the behaviors that pull that out than to say you're trying to create something called psychological safety. A lot of the managers that I work with would say, gosh, you know, that's
It's
murky. You know?
It's like that revolt that we've seen in the Western world recently against the so-called woke. And I'm not, taking
Yeah.
any side here, but when you think about it, it's a bit like that. You're saying the language and the big words that everybody want to say, you've got to adhere to that word. Everybody has to follow this thing. And people revolted against that. And you're saying, you just explain, talk about the outcomes and why we're doing it, as opposed to making it like a Bible thing, psychological safety. And what the hell's that,
I mean, and it's not unlike the conversation we just had about leadership with a big L, right?
Yeah.
If you sit down and talk to a line manager saying, I want you to be a leader, they're like, no, I don't. You know, I don't want to be a leader. You know, like
Sure.
these can be trigger words.
Sure. Okay.
And
Okay.
so we
okay.
don't want the message to get lost because we're comfortable with the label.
Yeah. Wow. I can talk about this for hours. It's so fascinating. A group of individuals, a team that is super motivated and happy and driven and passionate, can be as productive, in my opinion. We are taking on companies, literally employee to employee. Okay, so let me see. 20 times for every one employee. They have 20 or even 30, even 30 employees, 30 times our size, revenue, employees, resources, everything. We're taking on those folks and winning. And I still think I have lots of work. My God, by far I'm not bragging. You're here because I still think I'm learning and I need to learn. My God, not even 50% where I want to be, not even close.
And what I think is so interesting is how many different ways there are to be a good manager. Once you understand some of the principles, once you understand the impact that you're having on people, you can do it lots of different ways that work for you. I sometimes use this example about a manager who would start team meetings by showing his employees a set of emojis and saying, pick the emoji that tells me how you're feeling today. And I love this example because your eyes just got really big.
Yeah.
And some managers' eyes get really big.
Yeah.
They're like, I never do
I
anything.
know.
I'm not freaking emojis.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
ooh, how cringy.
Yeah.
But the power of it is it forced employees to talk about where their head's at that day before they got to the agenda.
But the thing is...
But it doesn't have to be emojis, right? You find your own way to get there.
But that's the interesting thing, Carol. This is... I'm sorry to bring us back, but I'm coming back to psychologically safety thing, because they're not going to even tell you the right one if they don't feel that you're accepting, if they don't feel that it's an environment that encourages them to be themselves and speak, if they're feeling depressed on the day or haven't been heard, or the company's not listening to them, or there is a real problem with the way we're doing things, or we should completely abandon that strategy and go in that direction. And if they're going to be angry or frown on them and all that, they're not going to tell you. They're going to start to lie and make you think that how great you are and you live within your own self-prophecy thing. And right? So they're going to lie about the emoji.
Absolutely. And that's where I'd go back to role model.
I really genuinely think if I was to add anything just from my own experience, so you're talking as a researcher, an awesome researcher for that is, for this matter, and I'm just simply from my experiences, I really genuinely, if there's any line manager listening, they really need to stop and pause and think. What's the health of my team psychologically when I'm in a meeting? Do they feel genuinely happy and at peace, meaning they can really be themselves in that meeting? And therefore, that's when creative ideas and creative criticism and getting to the bottom of issues will emerge. And I'm telling them, if they're listening right now, if they're not doing this, they can't expect fundamental improvements. They can expect small improvements, but nothing fundamental. If they are, not necessarily they are, depending on the business, on the industry, on that particular manager, where they're at in life, they might be leaving next week and don't care because they've given up on the company. Everybody's got their excuse. I respect you, whatever your situation is. If you are trying to create fundamental change or improvement, in your team, in the organization, in that department, division where you're in charge, to a big meter, in my opinion, is that health meter, the psychological health meter, which is you want to apply here is, if I'm sitting now with the team, 5, 6, 7, whatever that meeting is, do I feel those people are really being themselves in that meeting so they can really talk to me about how they feel about a strategy, a product, a client, an idea, the leadership, these directions, etc.
And if you and I were in a partnership and we had a shared business to get your listeners on board with that, I would say, yes, Anwar, now let's give people a few really simple tools to start with.
I love that.
That's what I would say.
I love that.
So I would say, okay, so you go into your meeting. One thing that you might try is don't let anybody talk. Say, I want everybody to take out a piece of paper. I want you to write down 3 problems that our product has that we should solve. So, this is your job now. I have assigned you to give me bad news. And then you walk around the table and have each of them do that. I think that there are other things that you can do, like deliberately call on people who don't usually speak and say, I'm just going to mix it up today because I want to hear from people who I haven't heard as much from. So we're going to sort of start with that. These are really simple behaviors, right? They're really kind of small things. I'm really interested in the contrast between introversion and extroversion, fast thinkers, slow thinkers. So much of organizational life is about speed, and so much of it is about getting your voice out there. So people have to really, jump and be quick and be fast. And so I really like to encourage managers to take advantage of the slow thinkers. And so not starting a meeting with discussion, but starting it with individual level brainstorming, and then asking individual people to say what's on their paper. That's a way of giving them permission without having to change the discussion dynamics immediately.
So you're saying this is part of restoring the balance of, if you feel in a meeting some people are overpowering the conversations, they are confident for whatever reason, they are extrovert, they've been there for a long time, they're comfortable with the environment and the product, and they seem to dominate the conversation. You want to give voice to those who don't feel empowered yet. You want to restore that balance. That is brilliant. That in itself is leadership behavior. And if you're a dad, isn't that what you do with your kids?
Yeah, and there are 2 pieces to it. And one is, I'm not hearing from these people who are less confident so I can create space for them. But the other thing that you were talking about is I want to make sure people will bring the problems to me.
Yes.
So you can actually say, today's meeting is to identify problems. I want you to tell me every possible thing that could go wrong.
So that's very interesting spin. You're not embarrassing those folks that
Right.
aren't speaking by saying, oh, because you don't speak, I'm going to give you a voice. Hey, man, like you're embarrassed me. It's like when you're trying to help your son in the community out there, they go, no, Dad, you're embarrassed me, almost
Right.
like that.
Exactly.
So what you say instead is, you're just teaching me, is you're saying, look, because each one of us touches the product and the client base in a different way, I want to hear it from everyone. So it's important for me that I want to hear it from Simon today, because clearly in their particular function, they talk with these clients and with these things. I needed 3 problems from you, and I would like you to spend the next 5 minutes explaining them to us.
And can I just very publicly reward you for what you just did? One of the issues that we sometimes have around diversity and inclusion is that some people are not suitably credentialized in the conversation. So if you have, let's say, a mixed gender team, people may not know everyone very well. They may not appreciate what Linda's role is. And what you did just beautifully there as a manager is to say, I particularly want to hear from you because.
You've got different experiences. You bring
Yes.
different angle to the conversation. You know, we want to hear from all corners of the empire, not just from a couple of representatives, the big cities, you know?
So you can see how in the work that I do, I'm really interested in these very small steps. You know, I really hope that a line manager will go away with a very specific, very concrete thing. Yeah, I could try that in my team meeting tomorrow. I worry that some of the academic language, it's well-intentioned, but it's hard for people to get a grip on.
Sure.
It's a slippery concept.
Look, the word
How do I
psychologically-
make that happen?
To your
right?
defense, the word psychologically, say it is when managers hear the word psychology or psychology, they, whoa, man, we're not equipped to deal with this. What are you doing to me? Am I even allowed to say that word? They feel it's something they don't want to have to deal with. Like it's a can of worm. It could be shocking
Yeah.
and too complex for them and risky.
And I think that's one particular thing that I bring to the conversation with my management hat on. You know, I know you talk with a lot of organizational psychologists, you talk with a lot of coaches, and their focus is going to be on getting individuals to enact these behaviors. As somebody who focuses on management, I'm more concerned about making sure that the behavior happens. And so if I can make the behavior happen and by saying, here's how you're going to start a meeting, and whoever that manager is, whether they're motivated to do it or not, start the meeting like this, then I know that the dynamics are going to happen.
The tools.
Yeah.
The tools of how you incorporate these things.
Can I
And you
give
make
you
them work.
a different example?
Yes, please.
So this is one of my favorite things to talk about. And we were just starting to kind of touch on diversity and inclusion. We often talk about how important it is to have demographic diversity, gender diversity, racial diversity, cultural diversity, age diversity
Yep.
in a decision-making group. And we often make the assumption that the reason that's important is because these different people will bring different perspectives. And I'm going to suggest a different frame on that. What we find is that if a decision-making group has visible diversity, so just to keep it simple, a couple of women in a group that's mostly men, the group itself acts differently. So it's not so much that these two women have such unique insights that they're bringing, but when we're in the presence of visible diversity, we automatically assume that there are also hidden kinds of diversity that we don't know about. And so the group acts differently. It starts to ask more questions. It considers more options. It starts thinking about multiple stakeholders.
Yep.
And like I love to talk about this research because often we say, well, you know, if those women aren't making their voices be heard, we're not really acting on the diversity. But in fact, they're making a difference just by sitting there, just by being in the room, because the dynamics of the
100%.
group discussion change.
100%.
And so as a management professor, I'm really interested in those kinds of things because it means that I can have the right things happening in organizations even if individual managers aren't completely on board with it.
Mm.
Like, we can change the context.
Yes.
We change the way the meeting is being held. And as a result, we get the kinds of dynamics and process that we're really trying to
Yeah.
achieve.
Yeah, definitely. Very interesting. There was a couple of things that you said to me you wanted to talk about. I think we've covered a lot about the line manager, but I mean, this is your passion, which is, I mean, it's an endless topic anyway. But you also wanted to talk about something to do with the, I mean, turnover. I mean, we did even touch on that too.
We did.
Can you? I don't know what. I mean, would like you to talk about something, but first, I want to say, you know, what is it that one thing that if you really want to send a message to those people you're trying to champion, that something that you really want them to learn, consider, something you want them to start to think about, what would that be?
If I'm speaking directly to line managers, the thing that I want them to recognize is how much their behavior matters. I think line managers underappreciate themselves the impact that they're having on employees because they're so caught up in their daily work. And so I think stopping to reflect on what it would be like to be on the receiving end of some of these things, what kinds of things they would like to have their manager have done. I think that level of self-awareness is the most important starting point.
That's brilliant. Okay. Can we talk about, there's two topics, if I can pick your brain, and if any of them not something that you done a lot of research or you understand or you're passionate about, please let me know. There's tons we can talk about. But the two are performance management in the sense that how do you take I mean, it's such a powerful tool, but not many people use it or using it in a wrong way. So, we create the software, but that's just a vehicle. I want to talk about the science behind it. I want to talk about, as a manager, when you're trying to structure or design that performance review or the HR, because, with our product, Carol, you can have, and back about your point, how HR are doing more strategic stuff. Our model, it really is at the heart of that, because the idea is, remember I mentioned the word of a manager self-service. So the managers now are empowered to be able to do what they want to do, when they want to do it straight away, instead of being in the queue, frustrated, waiting for the HR people to service them. And in doing so, HR overwhelmed, they're not doing strategic work. So we solved that problem. That's at the heart of what we do. We pitched it at conferences. We wrote about it a billion times, etc. So in saying that, now we call it with performance, when we talking to clients, we talk to them about the deployment model. How do you want to deploy this? Do you want the HR folks to design the templates for various teams? Because, as you would educate me about, there's this notion, part of that change that we've been talking about, where HR doing more strategic, there's the notion of the HR business, what they call it, business partner. Thank you. Yes. So the idea is, please correct me if that's the idea or not, but the idea is this particular person is allocated to understand and help, let's say, I don't know, a division of a couple of hundred people. Yeah, so that line manager and a bunch of managers there and team leaders, they're working with them and to make that division healthy and retention and whatever. In saying that, they understand that unit, and so the idea is they would prepare the right templates for those managers in that unit that they support, because they understand it well. And then the managers, the relevant managers, they would deploy it, meaning they take that template and say, oh, no, I've got 5-6 teams within my direct report. I will send them those reviews, and I'll engage with them on that review. That's one deployment model. So the design of, which is where I would like you to help us with and see if you can add value to the conversation, to design the right performance framework for that particular team. How do you go about that? And so that's one deployment. The other one is where the HR coordinator does it themselves. They deploy it. So they create maybe the template in consultation with the line managers and the managers, etc. And they go in themselves and deploy it, get it activated to the right people. They choose who the manager is and the team. So in saying that, it comes down to the design. The design is what's fascinating. We can create all this great tool and all that, but if the design is not right, it means nothing. We're just a vehicle.
Mm-hmm. So I always tell managers that there's a really big difference between the performance management form, that template, and the performance management conversation.
Okay, let's talk about that.
I think that's essential.
So what is that?
So the template are just prompts, right? They're going to suggest these are the employee's strengths, these are the areas for improvement. Right, so they're relatively generic.
Okay.
The question is, what gets populated into that template then? So I'll give you a very quick list of advice that I often give managers. You're going to call in your employee for their performance review. It happens every 6 months. It happens every year, whatever. Always ask the employee to review their own performance, and that's where you start the conversation. And this is really important because performance.
Take us through the journey. So how do you propose the process for work?
So
create the template, you deploy it, the employee does blah, manager does blah. Take us through the process. What you believe is clearly it needs to be equitable, it needs to create visibility, auditability. But what's more important is to create that quality conversation that will lead to a change.
Right.
So talk us through what's that.
So let's make the template really simple. The template asks the manager to identify the employee's strengths, to identify the employee's weakness, to rate the employee's potential for promotion, for reward, whatever, but also to suggest any sort of development or training. So those are 4 kind of standard things. So I'm the manager. I know that I have to fill out this template with 4 things. Needs to be transparent to my employee as well. These are the 4 things that we're going to be talking about. I think one of the first things I would do as the manager is ask the employee, before we have this conversation, I'd like you to fill out the template and share it with me.
Yeah.
Why is this important, Anwar? In general, we are our own most harsh critics. So what we usually find is that the employee is most likely to bring in some pretty tough criticism of their own
Interesting.
behavior.
A lot of managers would think the opposite. Do you think, psychologically speaking, the statement you've made is correct, that we
don't see
harsh
that.
critics?
We don't see that in the research. What we see in the research is that employees come in and they're pretty tough on themselves. And this is really fantastic because it means that as the manager, you are in the position of being able to uplift and coach and encourage rather than take your stick and hammer down. Right? So it ends up being a much more positive conversation. The second thing I always focus managers on is when you're giving feedback, so you're identifying these strengths and weaknesses, it's important that they be really specific and really behavioral. We know from bodies of research that women tend to receive more general feedback and it's less behavioral, and so it's harder to change.
General behavioral, sorry, give us some example. I'm so sorry. I'm supposed to know this, but my brain is not.
You're a great team player.
Okay, and that is what?
It's general. What does it mean? What have I actually done that you value?
Anyway.
Give me a specific example.
Got it.
Or let's suppose one of the questions is about what the employee needs to do to develop their potential. Needs to be more confident. How do I do that? What does that look like?
As opposed to, for example, more assertive with your colleagues when they are distracting you to be able to say, look, I'm really sorry, I've got to finish this. Or more assertive with the client if they say we need a discount, or you know what I mean?
What a nice specific example. Or more proactive in suggesting changes to the product. Like some really very specific things.
I get what you mean.
So that's really important. The other piece of advice that we give managers is that if you've got an employee who is doing lots of stuff wrong, Identify the one or two things that are most important and stop there. People cannot change on 6 different dimensions at once. They can change one or two things. Then the final thing is, once you've identified the specific problem, so you need to be more responsive to clients, you want the employee to propose the solution. So you may say, I really want this person to be more responsive to clients. And what that means to me is they should write more detailed emails. And if the employee says, well, I can be more responsive by returning them with a phone call, okay, they're going to do the phone call. So go with that. You know, the best solution to any behavior problem is one that the employee suggests, because that's the one that they're most likely to do.
As long as it works, providing it works.
Assuming it, yeah.
Sure,
So,
sure.
you know,
Role of
there may be
works.
some solutions you prefer, but if they're addressing the problem, if they
Yeah,
came from
it
the
shouldn't be
employee,
about what
that's
you
the, that's
prefer.
the
No,
one. That's
if
the
that's
one
what
that
you
should
mean,
go. So,
agree.
so those are 4 really specific examples about conducting the performance feedback conversation. And that's what influences what gets into the template. So then you get more quality content into the template.
So in a performance management module, the way we've done it, you know, you build your own workflow, meaning who's reviewing the form and when and how it's going through a bunch of stakeholders. It could be, you know, 360, whereby employee and manager and colleagues and clients, whatever it might be. So you design the workflow, who's going to review.
And one of those
form.
could be the self, could be the employee.
Yeah. I was going to
an early one.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was going to say, to your point, the standard one that we have that comes out of the box, meaning as soon as you say I want to do a performance review, the default workflow is the employee does the review first, then the manager does the review, then they sit down in a meeting, and the manager finalizes their opinion, and that gets published. So 3 versions are saved by default. To your point. So thanks for sort of validating that
that's
we're
important.
in agreement on that. As a matter of fact, someone even said to me, I would love your opinion on that, actually. Yeah, it is definitely a philosophical, interesting question. She said to me, look, this is great that you're doing that, Anwar, but we believe if the manager sees the submission, the review, the submission of the form by the employee, sees the actual data before they enter their own, we don't believe this is right or fair or effective. They might be just simply lazy. They don't have to think about these answers. They think this employee is doing okay, whatever. It doesn't need a lot of work, and they can just almost copy what they said. They need to do it in their own space without seeing it independently.
Yeah,
and then
that's
once
a really good thing.
Once they've done that submission, it opens up. They can see what the employee said for the purpose of the meeting and the together meeting, the final thing, but not before. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think it's really important, because that's how you're going to see the points of difference.
You're right.
And what I really love about that is the diagnostic potential, right? So, you know, if the 3 weaknesses that I've written down are completely different than the 3 weaknesses you've written down, we must have a really different understanding of what my role is, because my attention's all over here, and your attention as my manager is over here. That's the conversation to have. Then it's not even about performance, but it's about what's the nature of my job, and what are the priorities I should have.
I've visited some organizations, for example, schools. Schools are a big part of our user base. Probably 20% of every client is private school at this stage. We started to break into a public sector, but at the moment it's all independent. And some of them, I mean, all of them are Christian schools, just a different denomination of Christianity and stuff like that. But let's say Christian in general. And some of them, when we talk performance, they are so against the concept of performance. But even if they talk performance, they go, no rating, no rating, no, we cannot have any rating. It has to be open and a question where you answer maybe a drop down or something, but no rating.
Mhm.
There's no rating to it. We cannot do rating. What do you know about that? And
So I certainly agree that the most important part of the performance management process is the conversation, is about the discussion, is about the content that gets surfaced. Um, Organizations are bureaucracies. We all like categories, we like numbers. I think at some point, organizations have to allocate scarce resources. They have to figure out who is going to go for training, who's going to get the bonus. And so some sort of quantitative scoring
Yeah.
is probably important and useful. What I think is really important, though, is for managers to really understand what they're doing with those quant ratings, right? So, if the only purpose is to say, look, these are employees who are doing just fine. These are ones that need greater attention. These are ones that should really be recognized for being exemplary performance. Those are easy categories for managers to recognize. And, you can do that without a lot of fine tuning. But once you have a performance score that is like, let's say, a 1 to 7 scale, what's the difference between a 5 and a 6? Like really, what
So
is like
true.
how can you really
So true.
get at that? So then I start saying, well, have you trained the managers to understand that like what are you actually doing with the
Hence
numbers?
why some people, isn't that interesting, why a lot of organizations feel this is why we created the concept of the template and the platform, because they don't want the managers to invent the
Yeah.
questions and the design, because they could be making mistakes like that. So they want to, as an organization, the HR team and maybe the executive team decide on the style of performance reviews. They implement the templates, the managers just deploy them. And because of things like that, for example, what the hell is a 1 to 7 or whatever versus just 1, 2, 3? So there's a clear distinction between that 1 and 2 and 3.
And so, in our literature, there is this whole history of behaviorally anchored rating scales in the performance management literature.
And
And
that
the
is?
idea was that if you had a 1 to 5 scale and you were rating customer responsiveness, each number would have a behavioral example
Got it.
that the manager could match. Oh, that's what a 5 is. That's what a 6 is. Now, it turns out that those are really hard to develop, right? Because each scale is unique to each job because the behaviors are different in every job. And usually it's not for an overall rating of performance, but each performance dimension. So it becomes very, very cumbersome. But the principle is nonetheless important. Like, what is it that differentiates an employee who you're rating a 5 versus a 6? You need to be really clear about that in your own mind.
Sure. I think I agree with that.
And I really encourage managers, whenever they do performance management, is, before you have the performance review, sit down and write as many examples as you can think of where you've seen that employee in action. And good things and bad things, the way you made that suggestion in a team meeting, the way you handled that tricky question that an employee, that a client asked, the way you stepped in to help without me telling you to, when your coworker was overwhelmed. Employees really need to hear those examples. It's just like we were just talking about what is value-based behavior, right? This is the same sort of thing. These are the things that make me think you're conscientious, that you understand our customers, that you're being proactive. These behaviors, they're great illustrations.
Wow. Very interesting. Very interesting.
So many managers don't think
Yeah.
about their performance review process until like a week before when
know.
HR sends them the form. They're like, oh God, now I have to do this for 10 employees. It's so stressful. But if you really think about it as ongoing feedback, you'll notice these examples, and if you can jot them down.
I mean, the product that we designed, it's that we've got out there, it's an enterprise grade, and what I mean by that, it's customizable. So we don't know whether you want to use 1, 2, 3, 4, or you want to just, instead of that, say, not great, good, great. Like, we don't, if it would work no matter what. And you can even rate it, even with the good, bad, ugly versus 1, 2, 3. Like, it's so generic, so interesting, and mathematically still going to make sense and all that. But But I'm using it personally. The reason I'm intrigued, not because I have to tell people what to do. I mean, we just give them the software and they use it to whatever they want to do. It's very flexible. Do you know what I mean? But two reasons why I'm intrigued in this topic. It's such an important tool for my people. I'm implementing it here. We're not doing a great job so far. We're really started to crack onto this to make sure all my execs are using it now, and I'm using it with them as well. So that we're not there yet. We're probably about 60% adoption. Yeah. So that's number one. Number two is it really helps us to understand from the product design point of view the deployment model and this whole idea of the template and what else can be done if you have a competent HR team, and if the policies about and how to design these things, because it could be fairly complex or whatever. If they want to do that and dictate how that works, we need to learn we need to create the right features for them to be able to deploy it that way and enforce those
Right.
rules and all that. That's really where my curiosity comes from.
And I think that's really important. I think you're doing the right thing, and where it's almost like kind of reverse engineering. In order to design a good template, you have to understand the process and what we're trying to communicate to employees so that the template will reflect that.
Yeah.
And so often organizations go in exactly the reverse, where
Yeah.
here's the piece of paper, now make sure your performance reviews operate on that.
Yeah.
You know, in the last few years, we certainly have seen some organizations say, we're going to throw away the annual performance review. And whenever that happens, journalists contact me and they say, so can we throw away performance reviews? And I always point out that the organizations that can do that, they're only throwing away one conversation. There are still 365 days of the year in which employees are getting feedback. You can only get rid of that annual performance review if you're replacing it with feedback in other ways. The problem comes when people start thinking about feedback as something that only happens in that meeting.
Okay, let's talk about this. I'm glad you brought up the type of performance reviews. And again, not necessarily you're an expert at that particular topic, just from what you know. I'm not putting you on the spot here. HR and what you do is so wide. We're all of us learning still every day. So if we can talk about that, and I'll share my own vision about that, and that's why I want to talk about this. You know, there's so many different types of performance reviews you can do, and maybe the two obvious ones, or maybe three, four, would be the annual thing that everybody talks about, which is I'm not necessarily a huge fan of, by the way. That's the point I wanted to make. But nevertheless, that one is there, seems to be almost every company I know, all our clients talk about that. Then you've got the 360 and peer kind of review thing. And I'm not sure about, by the way, the frequency of that. With that review, is that also during the annual thing, or is that something they do maybe a bit more often, separate from the annual? I'm not really
Or
sure,
even
actually.
less frequent, and where a lot of times we see 360-degree reviews at critical points in the employee's career. So
Okay.
if we're thinking that maybe they should be
Promotions.
considered, yeah, exactly,
Ah.
because they're a really big investment, right? They take up a lot of people's time to do it really well.
We're doing an internal interview about this person before we promote them. Yeah, that's a bit rude, isn't it? Anyway, you're right. Thank you for opening my eyes about it, seeing it that way. You're right. Thank you. Appreciate that. So you've got the 360 as another type. So we talk annual, the 360, and then you've got the right. Of course, the one that everybody knows, and probably why a lot of people are buying a performance review software, ours, is because it comes back to compliance, makes them feel more confident, and de-risking the element of letting someone go. They want to do the PIP,
Yeah.
performance improvement plan, in an equitable and transparent and auditable way, so they feel that they're safe from a compliance point of view when they let that person go. We gave you the chances. We explain to you what's going to happen at the end of the 3 or 6 months after those 6 meetings, blah, blah, blah. And look, here's the results. Sorry, you have to go. So these are sort of 3 main ones, perhaps. You can argue there's 12 of them or 15. But for me, my biggest fan, and the one I want to implement as a number one priority in the company, to be honest, is the weekly catch-up.
So
Because you know how, Professor
it's
Carol,
important.
we talked about
Mm,
the problem starts 5 years ago when we
yeah.
talked about someone's quitting. Well, you wait for 12 months. It's every week. You
Mm,
want to make sure before they start to go too far in that wrong direction. You keep adjusting. Because I'm an engineer, software engineer that learned when I learned software. Thanks God, the timing when I was learning it in the early 90s, as opposed to earlier. A lot of older, people in the industry learned programming way before me. That means they wouldn't have learned about the concept of iterative really properly, as in practiced it when they did it. Yeah. I'm a big fan of iterative things. You try small things, you don't, the waterfall, the water fountain model versus the waterfall, the big phases of you do 3 months design and 3 months implementation, 3 months testing. We do all of those 3 phases every week, but tiny amount of the features. Yeah. So I'm a bit like that. You got to adjust every week. You don't just wait for 3 or 6 months.
So when you first started describing these different kinds of performance reviews, one of the things I want to make really clear is that performance reviews differ along lots of dimensions, right? So they differ in terms of frequency, they differ in terms of who does them, but most importantly, they differ in purpose. So you started by saying 360 is one type. And I would say, well, yeah, it's a type because it involves more people. But what's really important is, when would I use a 360? What is the decision I'm trying to make that makes it particularly important
Purpose,
to
you're
get
right.
these
The purpose,
so it's purpose
biggest
fit,
guidance
right?
here. Yes.
Super important.
Yes.
So your example of a weekly catch-up, absolutely. This is about continuous performance improvement of an employee.
Yes.
This is about making sure that my employee continues to not just get better at what they're doing, but that I continuously have opportunities to recognize things that they want to do that they haven't learned yet, or places that they want to grow and develop. So if you ask me, what's the best model for helping employees to thrive in an organization? Absolutely, I'd put all my money on that one. But I want to point out that organizations use performance reviews for other purposes. So you gave the example of the PIP, the performance improvement. And that tells you something about how frequently it needs to happen. It needs to focus on what behaviors, it needs to have a very clear bar about what's acceptable and what isn't. And that probably doesn't exist in your weekly catch up, because it's always better is better, like the goal is to keep moving the goalposts and keep sort of growing and changing. I think probably the single biggest problem that organizations have is that they don't think about the purpose of performance reviews. They just do them because we got to do them. Right. Of course, we have one every year. But one of the things that happens is that performance reviews in many organizations are only meant to identify the absolute lowest performers, right? The ones who aren't going to make it past probation, the ones who are really going to need some correction. So, but then that's all we've got. We've got that document. And then suddenly the organization says, well, but who are we going to give bonuses to? Well, we're going to give them to the highest performers. But your system wasn't designed to identify the best from the less good. It was only designed to identify the poor performers.
The bottom 10, yeah?
So it's all about starting with the purpose. Starting with the purpose and then thinking about what kind of job it is.
Totally agree.
There's no point in doing a 360-degree feedback if you have an employee who is a standalone data entry. Who needs 360 for that? If they don't have any customer relationships, if they don't work in a team, like you can measure the output and it's done. It's just not very efficient, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you have somebody who's working in the field and you as the manager don't even see them operating, you really need the 360.
So the two key words here that we both agree on, the design and purpose. Meaning, absolutely. First of all, to actually think about design, you are designing something. It's important to design it, but to design it for a purpose. So you start with the purpose and you design the review to fit the purpose. And if the purpose is to identify the 10% you want to get rid of, which, well, at least you know this is what you're doing. At least call it as it is. Don't think that you're doing performance improvement and you're doing that. But if you really want to identify who you want to reward and who you want to promote and stuff, then you design it like that as well. If you want to try to do it for both, well, do it for both. Do it, have distinct sections and do questions that address each and allow you to, in the quickest way, to be able to identify that. You design it to make it easy when you're trying to, how do I make sense out of from this? And that's why some of the features that we build, like the rating, like the ability to have a section, all these questions part of that section. So if you were to create some kind of rating, you can rate the entire section and you know, so you can, so we agree on that. And that's, I want to now move this into a very philosophical, interesting, on-point discussion right now with AI. We talked about the threat on the HR industry, on your amazing industry, from AI. And I was initially saying 90% of the HR roles are going to go because AI agents can create this and create that and stuff. And you're saying, but hold on, Anwar, if you're saying actually take 90% of the admin, hallelujah. We want that in industry because we want the HR folks to do real HR work as opposed to admin work. So this is great. So let's bring this into a performance management situation. You even said to me yourself, managers and employees are going to AI to answer the questions instead of sitting down and spending a few hours, meaningful couple of hours, to reflect and learn from the process that you maybe getting AI to fill out the answers. So how do we?
I don't think I said that anywhere. Let me.
I'm sorry.
Let me just correct. I did say that both parties were likely to use it, and I think that it can be used in a really positive way. But the point that I was making is that neither party likes knowing that the other party is doing it.
True.
So I feel shortchanged if I know that my manager used AI to write
Very
my
much.
performance review. Yeah,
Very
I'm
much.
disappointed in that.
Yeah, especially such interesting. Especially if I sat down for a few hours to answer these questions, I was so thoughtful about them because I do want to improve. I do want to stay in this company, and my manager lets an AI fill out the answers. That means they don't give a crap. They didn't even read anything I've written, consider anything I've written. It's so interesting.
And I want to emphasize that that's what the employee might think. In fact, what the manager might have done is take a first pass and then ask AI to point out, am I being behavioral enough?
Okay.
Where would I look for examples of the kinds of things? Give me some prompts about how to deliver this.
Is that during the answer or the design of the questions you're saying? Both. I mean, it could be both, really.
Yeah, I'm imagining. I'm imagining a conversation with the AI, where you're really treating the AI as a manager's coach.
Okay.
You know, help me to take this initial thing that I've written to make it more behavioral, more specific.
So that's fine if you do that.
To balance positive and negative, those kinds of things.
Okay. So you're saying that is fine as opposed to letting it do the whole thing. Do you mean?
There's a responsible way to do it.
So when about a year and a half ago, a year and 3 months on the dot, there was an HR conference in Sydney. And I spoke with one of our clients, an HR folk, HR manager of a 150 people company, smaller company, but out of New Zealand. A very smart guy, very nice guy. So we created a 30-minute presentation about AI and the type of jobs and how quickly it's going to be replacing a lot of roles around the world. But particular focus of that presentation was the role of HR as the guardians of those people in the organization to prepare the organization so we don't end up losing those people. They don't lose their jobs. They get repositions. They are prepared for that change. So they can start to use AI instead of losing their job or do other things.
Yeah. So you mean about trying to identify skill sets that people could be repositioned in other
100%.
teams or other roles. Okay.
Correct. So it's very interesting. So let's take this into the performance management. Okay, as an example, as a function of HR. If, someone can argue the line manager is not going to need the HR folks anymore to design that template. They can get an AI agent to design the perfect performance review template for their particular team. So all they need is the Martian logic performance management tool and an AI agent to tell them about the how to design these things. So now we've lost more of the HR function. That I'm not saying this is true. This is one. Someone could argue that. That's
Right.
one train of thought.
And so this is the point where you are inviting me to refute. Because
Well,
we're
yes,
playing that game, right?
yes,
We're playing that like,
but it's such.
take the opposite viewpoint.
I really would like to be as brutal as possible because it's a very specific conversation. It is, you might argue 5% or 10%, but it's a small part of the HR team is their support in designing the right performance management framework for various managers. So that role, I'm arguing, can be completely eliminated. We don't need HR, the line manager, and our platform and an agent. It's all done. Let's talk about if that is correct and not correct, and whether, no, the AI influence is actually a positive thing. It's going to make the HR role even more comfortable and better, and they're still going to be there. I mean, let's argue this.
Sure. So when you first started talking, what I had missed that the line manager was in it. So let me just sort of start there, and then maybe we can kind of build on it. So I think that an AI agent can ask an employee to reflect on their own behavior and identify many of the skills that they have and they want to develop, and prompt them to identify new ways that they could contribute. That you only need two people to do that. Two sides of the conversation.
Okay.
Because I understand that one's
And
one's
that's
an agent,
the
not-
line manager
not
and
a
the
person.
agent. So I mean it too.
No, I'm thinking that it's the AI agent and the employee. So that's the employee to reflect on their job.
Yeah.
They're identifying their skill set.
Yeah.
They're saying what they do.
Yeah.
Because our starting point here was not about, are you a good performer, but it's what attributes do you have
sure.
that you could contribute
Sure,
elsewhere.
but I thought you want to focus first on designing even the template first, the questions, the performance review process.
And to me, the questions
Because
are
that's where I thought HR would be adding a huge value to ensure the questions are relevant, delivering on the purpose, as you put it, needs to be purpose first. Why are we doing this? Design the questions and the process to ensure we get the outcome.
And I think the questions are relatively easy, right? Reflect on your experiences. What are the most important strengths?
I don't think
where
it's
do
that
you
simple.
well, I agree. The questions are simple. The answers are not simple.
No, even the
You have
questions.
you have to sort of start with something like, in your experience, where have you had these contributions? But where I'm getting to is that I think it's so important that people don't have that kind of self-awareness. And so we count on the line manager to say, actually, you're not as good at that as you seem to think that you are. Or, I think you're really missing the fact that a very unique capability you have that you haven't mentioned here because, maybe the agent didn't ask you a question in the way that would help you to surface it. That's really a unique thing that you have about pulling two things together.
I want to bring you back. I respect what you're saying very much. It's interesting in its own right. I want to come back to it. How an agent can even help the employee. And please correct me if that's what you were saying. Help the employee to make sure the way they're addressing these questions is thoughtful and fair, and they learn from it. That means the agent is challenging them on and stuff. So maybe
Give me an example.
Yeah, exactly. So they
Can you quantify that?
exactly. So in other words, they provide the evidence, they provide the facts, and therefore the questions reflecting the facts.
Yeah.
Right. Behavioral based, which is what you taught me before. Thank you.
Right.
So in saying that, that is really awesome. But let's go back to where it all starts. Designing, it's a big thing for me. I'm sorry, I keep talking about that. I really feel just the tool by itself is nothing. Designing the questions for the right environment, for the right team at this particular point in time, for that purpose. All of that is the design. So, for example, the weekly catch-up is very different kind of questions to the yearly thing, the annual thing, right? So that weekly catch-up for this particular team, how do you design it in a thoughtful way? And even in that in itself doesn't mean it has to be the same. You continuously improve it. those questions you might just almost every week you realize, oh, that question, maybe I'll change it to say that, or I'll take that, add another question. So designing of the questions, let's start with that. I'm suggesting HR can play a big role in that. And now an AI agent can design them perfectly for that manager. If that line manager can provide the evidence to the AI agent about the type of role, about certain KPIs the role has, etc., and boom, here's the questions, here's the template created. So there's less need for an HR person. I want to talk about that first.
I'm struggling with the purpose being to identify future opportunities for this employee, and at the same time saying, in this particular time and place. Like, my understanding is that what you're trying to do is identify, almost in a very blue sky way, what are the skills and attributes that this person has that may be valuable sometime in the future.
So let's
we don't
take
even
a real
know,
example.
right?
Let's work on a weekly catch-up. Can we just please think about this example? We're doing a weekly catch-up. We are a line manager, a team leader, a line manager, and it's got a bunch of team leaders and stuff. And he want to create a framework. He goes, okay, use the Martian logic performance review thing. And in terms of the questions and stuff, you want to create some kind of framework, what's acceptable, what's not, and stuff. And they would normally engage an HR person to work with them on creating the right framework that will deliver the best outcome for that weekly catch-up, which is the idea of the weekly catch-up, is that constant feedback and adjustment.
Yeah.
To me.
And it has a very short time frame.
Yes.
Whereas the other example about what if AI takes away your job and I need to use it somewhere else in the organization 10 years from now, that is a really long time frame.
Sure. So the question is, I would like you to come in on, can AI eliminate the need for the HR support for designing the performance review framework, meaning what I mean by the framework is the questions and the stuff as opposed to the tech. We're not discussing the tech here.
Yeah, and I think in general, I'm going to say yes, because I think what the HR professional delivers is the things that are most common across employees that most align with that organization's needs. And as we talked about at the very beginning of our conversation, and the line manager does the customization and the personalization. Now, there may well be surprises that come up along the way. Maybe the line manager says, hey, these questions, somehow they're missing this unique capability that this employee has that, just aren't being captured here. Or they don't capture the fact that this crisis happened and the questions are meant for business as usual and it didn't reflect this. But yeah, most of the time, I think yes. I think it would free up the HR professional's time to do other work.
Okay. Interesting the way you put it.
And I think
Freeing
that's
up.
especially important because of the way you described it as a weekly catch-up. What's the drama that's going to happen over 1 week? We should be able to reasonably be able to predict what do we need to know to keep things moving forward.
Are we being too optimistic about HR industry not to be losing big chunk of it? You keep using the term, that's fine, that's admin stuff, HR can do more interesting stuff. And how about if more and more interesting stuff, that word interesting stuff now is at risk by the AI doing that? Because we're not talking, AI is not anymore just automation, it's an intelligent thing.
Yeah.
Such as designing this question. You would think designing to me, for example, that's why I'm focusing on this point, because designing the framework of a performance review, meaning the questions and the workflow process, therefore, by which the review is conducted, the review is provided from the different stakeholders, all of that is so strategic to deliver on the right outcome. As we said, you and me, you want to know the outcome, you want to be strategic about designing the questions and the process to deliver on outcome. So if we agree now that AI could be helping the manager with that, then, well, we started to talk now more strategic work being taken away from the HR folks. So what's going on here?
Well, for me, it's all about the time frame. You were very specific. This is about the weekly catch-up. This is about incremental performance. And what I take away from that is, I got the trajectory. I know what I'm aiming for, right? I'm not anticipating a major disruption that's going to happen between this Monday and next Monday. But if the performance review has a different purpose, which is about the organization's sustainability into next year, if it's about my ability to survive industry disruptions, then I think it becomes a much more strategic task.
But it's even then, let's say it's a big, large organization, 10,000 people. And let's say this project to design exactly what you said, which is a performance review that will, that is so strategic, that's going to help us to make sure we're going to be competitive and sustainable in the next 5 years. Yeah. Even that, let's say a team of 3 people, maybe we were 5, 6, 7, 8 people, including 2, 3 people in HR and a bunch of maybe committee from a bunch of execs involved in that. Then all of a sudden that could become one HR person, and instead of 3 months, 1 week could be designing this. So we've lost more power to the HR, more hours. So at which point are we going to continue to say, oh, there's more strategic, more strategic? You know, I think we need to start to think there could be a lot of loss of jobs, and what does that mean for the HR industry? I think maybe that's an interesting conversation. Maybe you and me can do a separate, and you know what? I promise you right now, in public, I'm going to organize a 2-hour live webinar with 4 or 5 panel people, including yourself. I'm going to bring HR practitioners. I'm going to bring line managers. I'm going to bring data scientists. Talk about this, the AI and HR.
I think it'll be really interesting. I think it's a really important thing to be addressing.
Very, very interesting.
Where I keep getting stuck, and this is a place where you can educate me, is even though AI is learning as it goes along, it can only learn as it gets more information. So if we reduce the amount of input in, so if we start narrowing down the HR expertise, for example, across industries, let's say, or across time horizons, or across different kind of functional expertise, then aren't we limiting the agent's ability to learn?
I don't know about that, because the data points that you're referring to, they're not built by HR. They are really footprints of what's happening in an environment, meaning the employees and the clients and the managers and the ecosystem being functioning. That's the data points. As long as you're collecting these data points, whether, at the moment seems to be HR are the people collecting those data points and the guardians of those data points, and the people that are interpreting these data points and deciding what to do because of that, the interpretation, the findings. Well, as long as this data is being collected, then we don't need HR to be involved. It feeds straight into the learning, So I'm not really sure about that. Do you know what I mean? That's just, that data is really, it's really, okay, an employee with ADHD seems to be functioning well in this job or not. And when ABCD was done in that environment to be able to accommodate this employee with ADHD seem to have worked or not. These are just data points.
Yes, I agree with all that, but I'm picturing, as you're describing this, as a relatively intact system, that the agent is working with that company's data. And it can do wonderful things. Like, one of the things that frustrates me always when I work with managers is information about training is over here, information about payroll is over here, information about how, like, the systems don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
So this is very exciting to me that we're now going to integrate this and get a sense of the patterns. But it's only company specific, right? So there's some really particular value with an HR professional who says, yeah, but you know what? It works different in government.
Got it.
And if you turn that on its head, and if instead all of our data now is coming through because we use recruiting in this particular way, but in government we do it this other way, and that data is not in the agent, don't you need that pushback from the professionals?
Yeah, I think that's where AI could be actually superior in this kind of area. Because you're not talking about just one intelligent system. what we're actually building, and for better or worse, and hence why a lot of people perceive a lot of risk and problem from this invention, is the fact you've got these multiple brains, but they learn from each other and share consensus and learn from each other, and learn and not to learn, and adjust. And that is when it's powerful. Because what's really, when you think about it, what's really probably the most unique thing about a human being is the fact that we have intelligence, but we sit down in a room with people with different experiences from different countries, companies, etc. If you think about the tribes, when those leaders and smart people from different tribes, and they get together and have a meeting and they share these experiences from different tribes. So that is what's different about us, is those brains that we create an intelligence, we make decisions from that meetings that over exceed the knowledge or the capability of any particular brain. The one, so the team is more powerful than the individuals, and this is the same with the AI systems, unfortunately. And you're talking, therefore, here the magnitude of that is multiplied by million or billion because of the speed of it, and because of the connectivity and how quickly they can exchange that information and adjust and create consensus.
So, to give you a metaphor, I think what you're describing is partly the way I see my value add to management. I think one of the things that we do as academic researchers is we don't just look at data within a single organization. We say we're going to look across organizations, and we see these guys are doing these practices, these are doing this one, and here are the different consequences. So it's that kind of bird's eye level. And I think if you're talking about designing AI tools that do that at, let's say, an ecosystem level, I think then it does get very exciting. And then it's not just integration of data within a single organization. But of course, that's also where I start to get concerned about ethics and
It's interesting.
whose data gets shared with who.
Because
So it becomes much more complicated. But I can appreciate what you're saying, that's where the value appears.
the HR topics and the strategic HR stuff that we're discussing, typically they end up leaking to the public. It might start initially as something that's a secret, but eventually it's going to end up in public, even if it's an issue that will end up being debated in court, and all this information is in public. So that's what those AI things are learning from the intellect of literally 100,000 years or whatever. Everything we've ever learned as humans now is in the public domain about HR issues that were debated, and topics, and academic people like yourself, and court documents, and all the context from all different angles are there. And that is the consensus. That is the interesting thing that's been built. Now, in saying that, the one thing that I believe still in is, the role of our roles in our jobs. When you think about the risk of someone losing their job, right? And if you're going to talk about the retraining or what are the things that we'll continue to do, I say to my people, what I found in the last 5 years, the value that we add, and the meter for us of success to be able to compete with those multi-billion dollar companies they are a lot bigger than us, and we compete with them. That meter of success is our ability to be able to dig deep enough about the root cause of the problem. So what happens is, in our industry is, once you've started that software, a product, the initial thing, once you've started to have clients, you're going to start to get incredible feedback from the clients. It's so valuable. First of all, because you need to listen to their needs as far as they're concerned. We're paying you. You've got to do that feature for us. You should do it. It makes sense. Do it tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. We're going to do that feature. So what they tell you, and in a very innocent way, they're awesome. I'm not saying anything negative about them, but they have a pain, and they tell you, they think in their mind, oh, we need a feature that does blah, blah, blah. Can you do that feature? Our job is to say, okay, interesting. I appreciate that. Let's talk about the pain, though. Where's that starting from?
Yeah.
Dig deep into the root cause.
The diagnostic.
Deeper, this is the meat of success for us. How deep did we dig to get to the root cause? Did we really get to the zero actual root, or closer? The deeper we are, the more successful we are. Meaning the solution that we build is going to be long lasting. It's going to withstand the challenge of time, the test of time, and it's going to compete better. We're going to be able to, the way it gets built naturally, because we understood the root cause, can be customized, can be broadened. It's going to connect with the other solutions. It's strategically speaking, it's so important. Otherwise, you'll find in 6 months' time or 2 years' time, we have to gouge that solution completely out and start from scratch. And that is such a big failure. And it takes a lot of time and waste a lot of time and opportunities and stuff like that. So that is the one thing that I say that the AI can't do, is the quality of the conversation. When you're sharing a meeting between the brilliant minds of solution designers and the clients and the domain problems, and you're sharing the quality of the conversation, get everybody engaged to be able to really get to the root problem and the potential solution stuff, the way you conduct that. So for example, in that example at the conference, when I explained that, I said, once that solution, the problem is understood and you start to talk solution, then you can get software agents, as in AIs, to build the software for you. That's not the issue, building the software. It's what are you building? How are you building it for? What is the real cause problem that you think? As opposed, I used an example. I said, you see some people spraying chemicals on the leaf of a tree because the leaves are brown. And do you know what the problem is? They realize years later, 5 doors down, the neighbor 5 doors down, 5 blocks down, the pouring, because he's a mechanic or something, he keeps pouring engine oil, and that's a huge part of the root of that tree is down there. I mean, it's just such an interesting example because it's the root cause, the root of a tree. Do you know what I mean? And people spraying, they go to Bunnings and get some chemical and spray it on the root, on the leaves. You cannot build a solution there. That would be that solution, which is the thing spraying on leaf, as opposed to, this guy, the root are going that way. It's either this mechanic needs to find a way not to pour the oil there, or we build something there that blocks redirects the roots not to go in that direction anymore. Or, do you know what I mean? That's when we start to talk about working on the right part, on the right problem.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree with that, Anwar. And I think we got to kind of a similar place where I was saying that one of the values that managers deliver is to tell people things that they don't recognize themselves, because if that information doesn't even get into the template, if it doesn't get stored in the database, it can never be used by the agent. When you were talking, I was thinking about AI being used in medical diagnosis. And, I really appreciate that one of the things that's going to make AI really valuable is the ability to leverage these large data sets and say, this disease is related to this cause. And now we finally have enough data points to be able to kind of see that connection.
Yeah.
But it still required some medical professional somewhere earlier to ask the question, do you chew gum? And put that into the data set so that we can start to kind of pick that up.
Same thing.
And that's where I think that we really need to find ways to make sure that employee ingenuity, even if it's just sort of random brainstorming to build in some of the random walks that get into the data, so that we don't miss that and get caught only looking at the patterns and not the ability to build new patterns.
Yeah. The quality of the conversation is the most fascinating. It's my own words. I don't know what they mean in your world or how they can be maybe translated or the equivalent of that. I walk away, we have the so-called the 11 o'clock meeting. That's the product meeting with the developers directly, the senior developers and the product team. So about 3-4 product managers and a bunch of developers and the senior developers. Talk about the updates, where we're at with the different projects. Everybody reports on where they're at and talk about challenges and continue to try to stay ahead of the team in terms of the analysis brain power. As the product managers bring all that knowledge from the business, the product managers would have worked, on average, each one of them would have worked with more than 500 clients over the last 5 years, got depth of knowledge about the space. And they continue, including me, to work with clients. So we're up to date with why this client, why do they use the performance? What are the settings? What are the requirements? We speak with the clients all the time. So we bring that feedback into the product. It's a big meter for me when I walk away from that conversation. It varies every day, the quality of that conversation, but I'm in a good place right now. But you know what I mean? If I can tell you, it means the world to me. It's such a very important. I beat myself for the rest of the day if I feel maybe I could have been lost my cool a little bit. I did not give maybe Tristan enough oxygen to finish his sentence. Something like, oh, man, what have you done? I beat myself until the next day, determined I'm going to do better the next day. It's so important. And that is the shit that AI cannot replace, because that's the only time you create an environment where you're going to get to the root cause. Otherwise, you're kidding yourself. What can you comment on that?
No, I agree with it. You know, I mean, I think that I don't think AI can replace human connection, and that's what you're really describing. It's probably one of my biggest concerns about the workplace right now, that as we design better systems, more efficient systems, more virtual systems, we're missing opportunities to build human connections because they feel inefficient.
When I was doing 3D graphics at during my computer science degree, was one particular course, 3D graphic programming, how to do 3D graphics, and I was a big fan of this whole thing because that was during that time when Jurassic Park, the first Jurassic Park was released. So I was in that era. OpenGL is the actual Java library that they used to build the tools that the designers used. So we were the programmers that build the tools, like, for example, CAD or any of those 3D graphics tools that designers use to create the objects, and they put the objects in and model them and move them around. So I was in that sort of early adoption of that industry. It was all fascinating. I remember that at that time in that movie, to produce a frame, so that's 1 out of 30 to create a second of animation, 30 frames per second. One frame was taken to the tune of sometimes 36 hours to render that one frame, right? Using machines at the time, on average, $500,000 a machine. It was called Indie by a company called Silicon Graphics. It's gone now. Sun Microsystems absorbed it, and Sun Microsystems was absorbed by Oracle. So both names are gone now. But it was $500,000 a machine, and I was using those machines, sitting on a $500,000 machine at the lab at Curtin University in Perth. So I was part of that industry. It was very, very exciting, time. And I remember the professor used to say that he was a thought leader on the topic and stuff. He used to say the human face is the hardest to animate. And it was so easy. You can say that within 3 months doing this, being involved in it, you can start to realize how easy it is to create an object that you will never be able to distinguish between whether it's a model or a picture of this.
Yeah.
But when you come to do a human hand, or particularly the face, oh my God, at that time, we used to think we are 20 million years away. It will never, ever going to happen. We somehow, so we can distinct when we look at a human face, there's something in the eyes and the skin and the whatever. It was so interestingly human about that, And I wonder now, this kind of conversation in the context of an AI, what is the AI? What is the one thing? Because that's the crux of the conversation when it comes to replacing jobs or whatever. My theory, your theory, everybody's got a theory about that. What are the things that AI will never replace, right? Okay, what does that mean? Is there something equivalent to that? To something us about humans, we will always make that distinction. No way, that's fake, that's AI versus, or are we completely going to be fooled very, very soon now? It's completely different. There's an intelligence happening. I mean, someone was even arguing, what the hell is intelligence in human? A baby is a dumb thing. It doesn't know anything, doesn't have much of a conscience. We develop that conscience through our experiences, and it's molded by our parents and the community we grow in and stuff like that. All that is just been even molded with our experience. And that is what we're doing with those systems. We're training them by data. We're molding their experiences. We're creating their conscience. I mean, you can argue human conscious, AI conscious for the next 100 years. But what does it even mean? Physically speaking, is that going to equate to anything at the end of the time? Okay. Interesting, isn't it?
I'll just make one comment. So,
Please, I take your time.
So I feel like my mind went in a somewhat different direction than your final question, and I understand what you're saying. What is the one thing that AI can't do? But my starting question, I think, is really a different one, which is the more we embrace AI, what is it that we're losing? And I'm going to give you a much more mundane example than the Jurassic Park one that you gave me. So I can remember when we first developed desktop printers. So organizations went from having a printer out in the hallway to one that was going to sit on your desk. And we were all so excited about that because now I have my own printer. I don't have to walk down the hallway. And sociologists told us the cost. The cost was that, first of all, people no longer stood up from their desk. So there's a physical well-being cost, right? People just sit there and feed the paper. But the other thing that hallway printer gave us was slack in our day. So there was a moment where we would get up and we would go, but somebody else was using the printer and our job was behind it. So we'd have to stand there and make chit chat, and we'd meet someone who we otherwise wouldn't have met. So this sense of serendipity or randomness and human connection that a more efficient process, because it definitely is more efficient for me to have the printer right there. The cost was so great. And that's what I worry about, that AI will encourage us to focus on efficiency and lose the value of the sloppiness, the randomness, the serendipity.
Do you think that will... do you think people are going to care about that? That's the trouble. That's the problem. I so agree with you. We're inventing something that's going to harm us for the purpose of freaking efficiency. I mean, why the goddamn with the rush? What's this whole efficiency thing? I mean, when you're about to die, is that when you reflect back on, you're going to see maybe 5 or 10 events that you give a shit about. All these million other things are going to be nothing. The key things are, you're going to think about how many people you made happy, starting with your own maybe kids and family. Were you a good dad? Were you a good husband? Were you a good blah? You make people unnecessarily be angry, unhappy. You're going to beat yourself probably before you die. You reckon you're going to fucking worry about how efficient you made your program is, or the printer work or something? I mean, it gives a shit. We want to be happy in life. What's with this efficiency bullshit?
And I think that's the questions that we have to keep asking ourselves as we build these systems. Like, what's the cost to us? What are we giving up about our humanity? Not whether there's something unique to our humanity, but what do we lose? This is an entirely different conversation, and we don't have time to go into it. But I feel like we've done the same sort of compression around people working from home. We've made it a matter of, well, it's inconvenient for me to take the commute. And we haven't really had that
another level of the printer.
Exactly. We haven't had the in-depth conversation about what's the real cost to us about losing this second space, the workplace where things happen. And, it's not about, you're more productive in the office, or you're at home, or, you're doing laundry and multitasking. Like that's really oversimplifying the question. But what are the costs to giving up a place where we would randomly interact?
Remember that movie was about 20 years ago. So one of the pioneering movies about future and stuff like that of humanity, whereby it's about this robot. What's his name? That was starts the movie with this robot going through Earth is non-inhabitable anymore. It's got
WALL-E. It's one of my favorite movies of all time,
right.
Especially that first half.
Right.
Oh, so, brings tears.
So, the example that you said about this printer sitting at the desk versus to walk to the hallway, and now we're saying, oh, you can work from home. You've got everything you need and a Zoom. You're not even
Yeah.
going to meet the clients. Nothing more and more isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that become, we're encouraging people to become those humans sitting at that
Yes.
recliner chair, being fat, the food comes to them, they don't have to move.
Yeah.
I mean, where is this going?
Yeah, it worries me. And, you know, for me, work is one of the most fundamental connectors. And so the more we pay attention to work, the better we'll get at developing connections.
Beautiful. Well, listen, that was an amazing chat, and I've written it here, a live webinar about HR and AI, and you're
I
going
see
to be
it's
on that
written in
panel.
capitals.
Exactly. I'm gonna start to work on this. It's very fascinating. You've been very insightful. I've learned a lot from you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Everybody,
Amaris.
Professor Carol from the University of South Australia in Adelaide, and appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anwar.
Okay.